So we come now to the one item on our agenda today, which is an update on the infrastructure build and the associated budget for America's Cup 2021. Can I welcome to the table Tina Simmons, the Chair of America's Cup Event Limited, Kevin Shoebridge, Chief Operating Officer with the Emirates Team New Zealand, and Dean Kimpton. Perhaps if I can first of all thank Emirates Team New Zealand for being here today and for being available at the workshop the other day. But I know there's a keen interest, particularly in the announcement last Friday of the number of potential challenges that may now come in, and I'd be appreciative if you'd maybe like to lead off with giving us an update from your perspective on where the America's Cup event is at and what the outstanding challenges in the wider sense actually are. Tina, are you leading, or
I am.
Kevin? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again today. Before I start and Kevin starts, we have a little video we'd like to play you.
It's excellent, thank you.
Bastion Point. Here, we're just going to have a little look out on the racecourse. Yeah, when the America's Cup was last year, we were way out in the outer Gulf. And, you know, although that was nice steady wind conditions, it was pretty tough for the spectators. It's actually a big area, when you look at it from here. Like we can have a race course right up inside Bean Rock, right up to the container terminal, or we can have one from here down towards Rangitoto and a bit more of a southwesterly. And obviously we've got the Rangi Channel option, so we can cover all the wind directions, but in here we get the real natural amphitheatre. So right in close here, you'll actually hear the boat sailing. The noise of the winch is being released. So you know, they'll literally be going right past here. People are going to be able to see this race course whether you're on the water or not, and that's pretty special for us to be able to bring it to as many people as possible.
Kevin will be talking a little bit more detail after I've spoken about the race course. But look, since we were here in March, which doesn't seem like that long ago, an enormous amount of work has been done, as you would expect. But the key thing to note is that ETNZ, ACE, America's Cup Limited, and Auckland Council and the Crown and all their respective agencies, of which there are many, have worked together in a true partnership. We faced many, many challenges, not the least of which an incredibly tight time frame and getting costs down and each time they looked like they were blowing out, we had to get them back down again and keep the integrity of the event. But without the spirit of that partnership, none of that would have been possible. Resource consents have been lodged, as you know, and accepted. The Wynyard Edge Alliance is together and a work plan of construction has been agreed. ETNZ, and particularly Kevin, have been working assiduously to attract new challenges to the event, because we know, like everybody else knows, that the more challenges that we have in the event, the better the event from a spectator point of view, the more countries it'll be broadcast to, but the more economic benefit will arise from each team. that joins. But there will be more about that later when Kevin talks about the thing that you do need to, I'm sure you're all interested in, which is the issue of the challenges. But the fact that there have been so many challenges enter last Friday, 8 in total, is really a testimony to a number of things. One is the sensible nature of the protocol, and in past they haven't always been sensible, as you know. The design of the boat, but actually spectacularly, I think the attraction of Auckland or Tamaki Makaurau to the challenges. They are all looking forward to coming to Auckland to compete in this, the world's oldest trophy. So today we're releasing what is called the event concept, which I'm holding up a copy of, which is available to all of you either right now or after this meeting. I'm just going to take you through some of the key points on the event concept. It was a document that was produced out of extensive consultation with key stakeholders, excuse me, many of whom are up there on that slide, and 500 members of the public, all who were asked in person what their vision was for the Cup and how they saw the opportunities and how they saw the risks. So the concept that we've developed and that you'll get here today, which is the first of many documents, I imagine, really is their work, the work of the stakeholders and the public. We just happen to facilitate it. But if there's two words that sum up the essence of the event concept document, it's inclusivity and accessibility. The event will be for everyone, young and old and in between, and for every culture. We've already indicated, if you recall, that the event will be televised free to air through TVNZ, and there will be no entrance fees to the Cup Village, which again is a significant departure from the past. So as one team, we will stage the best America's Cup ever and win it again, which is more important than anything, so that the America's Cup stays forever in Auckland for our lifetimes. Can we move on to the next slide? Sorry. I just want to... No, that's not the one. Sorry, it's the venue back one. That's it. Thank you. Just to talk a little bit about the venue for the bases and the event village. It's shown on these slides, and again it's in this book. The final base configuration, as you'll be aware, is yet to be determined because that is in turn determined by the final number of challenges. But the footprint for the venue is, as you see on the slide, and that won't change. But important to note, it will include an international broadcast centre, which is down on Jellicoe Street car park, where we're expecting the likes of CNN, Foxtel, BBC, NBC or ESPN, an Italian broadcaster, and possibly China TV. TVNZ will have their standalone studio on another part of the venue. The venue will also host over 100 super yachts, whose significant wallets will be open for everything from refits to day-to-day supplies and servicing. There'll be free activations over the 50-plus days of the total event for domestic and overseas visitors. And we're expecting up to 100,000 visitors on peak days. The village will showcase New Zealand's best food, wine and entertainment, along with kapa haka and waka performances. Obviously there'll be spectacular opening and closing ceremonies, and that's just what's planned on the land. On water, there's a huge amount of planning involved, but essentially the harbour master is the boss of what happens on water, and Shu will talk a bit more about that in a minute. I'd just like to touch on an issue which I know is of interest to many of you, and that is the interest of the jobs that the America's Cup and the economic benefits that the America's Cup here in Auckland will deliver. And we're not economists at all at Emirates Team New Zealand, but we thought it was useful just to touch on some things that we know, and that's the suppliers that we use, many of whom I think we've shared their names with a number of councillors over the last 6 months who have asked for that information. But just to give an example of the sorts of jobs that are being created and businesses that are being boosted and supported by the America's Cup, we asked one of our suppliers, Southern Spas, who themselves are based in Onehunga, and who are likely to be building, I think, is it over 13 masts for the America's Cup. They gave us a list of their suppliers, which totals over 500 businesses in the greater Auckland area. And those businesses are welders, painters, electricians, upholsterers, sailmakers, the list goes on, and I apologise because we just don't have the resources to quantify all this in any detailed, meaningful way. In fact, I think it would be useful if we had someone perhaps at AT to be able to start with a baseline study of pulling all of these types of lists together and actually burrowing down on the jobs and what they are and how they're benefiting. But the 500 suppliers for Southern Spas alone are spread everywhere. They're spread Warkworth, Panmure, Albany, North Shore, Tamaki, East Tamaki, Mangere, Hobsonville, Mount Wellington, you name it. There isn't an area in the Auckland region that is not populated by one or more, many more in some cases, of these suppliers. So I can answer questions on that to a degree. Kevin's probably best to answer it in terms of our specific suppliers. So perhaps I'll ask him to just talk about some stuff that we, ETNZ, are doing.
Well, just adding on to what Tina talked about then, and since we last visited you here at the council, we've started up our own boatyard, our own production facility to build our race yachts. That's now functioning over just up by Constellation Drive on the North Shore. Has a staff of 40 already, working on our first race yacht, which we started building a few weeks back. And the focus there is not only do we need highly skilled labour, we're trying to bring a new generation of young people through to teach them the skills as well. So we're working pretty hard bringing young people into that organisation. I think I actually signed up the youngest guy we ever had involved with the team the other day. He came in a school uniform and signed a work contract to start at the boatyard, so that was nice. We're also running an apprenticeship program. We've started that as well. And that's just our little portion, let alone all these other suppliers that are actively involved in the Cup. Southern Spas, for example, that Tina mentioned, they are going to do very well out of the America's Cup, it turns out. Not only will they be building 3 race masts for us, I think every other team bar one at the moment has decided to build their spas here in Auckland. So that's 13 masts is a pretty substantial order to start with.
But as I said, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So we can talk about our suppliers, and many of them have also apprentice programs. Rayglass, for example, who we've been dealing with lately, I think have 5 apprentices, and most of them are looking to gear up because in actual fact many of them talk to us about the shortage of labour that they have and skilled labour, and so they're producing their own, and they can do that through apprenticeships. So that's my bit. I will hand over to Kevin now to talk about the racecourse.
Yes, I'd just like to run you through the racecourse and just give you a little bit of a feel for how that's going to look, and then I can also expand on what we know so far about the new challenges, or the challenges that have tried to enter last Friday. If I could just get those slides of the two, yes. That first one there, basically what we're looking at there is an outline of the extremes of the usable racecourse area in the harbour and the Gulf. And if we flick to the next slide, please. What we've tried to do here, the priority for us has been to make the racecourse as accessible as possible to the viewers. And I don't mean just people that have got a boat, I mean people that can actually walk to a vantage point and watch the racing from land. We've pushed as hard as we can to get the courses inshore enough that you can get a good view from the land. In the past, courses have been way offshore, like you saw in the previous video, and then, you know, it was an hour and a half's tow on a boat, and you needed a decent-sized boat to get out on the course. You couldn't even see it from land. Ever since San Francisco, when the racing was conducted right down the city waterfront there, I think it sort of opened everyone's eyes that this was the future, and if we wanted the sport to continue to grow, we needed it to take it to a bigger audience. The courses that we've drawn up there, A to E, they're particularly challenging courses for sailors. It's very shifty. It's got there's a lot of current, all the things that you don't normally look for in a race course. But again, I think the modern sailor takes that as part of the game now, that's all part of your advantage or disadvantage. You have to learn to sail in these difficult conditions. The 5 courses that we've published there are to deal with varying wind conditions and wind strengths. Course A, which is off Takapuna, Milford area, basically that's a 360-degree course. You can race in any wind direction in that course, but the downside from that is it's the furthest away from the vantage points. Course B in the Rangitoto Channel, we've got a wind range of about 80 degrees of wind variation of wind from the north and the south that we can use that course, so it's quite restrictive, and it doesn't really line up with prevailing wind conditions. Course C is the course that we've put most focus on for 2 reasons. It's right under North Head, it's right under Bastion Point, and squeezed in by Bean Rock. We get about 140 degrees of usable wind direction on that course, and with the breeze in this area being predominantly northeast or southwest, that's the most likely. So I can see course C being our most likely option. Course D is there in case there's an easterly, which is unusual, and then we've got course E way out between the tip of Waiheke and Maraetai. That's an area we call the back paddock. It's a course that we used a lot in our training prior to Bermuda. It was away from prying eyes, and it was a great place to sail. So the reason we've got course E there is if we get extreme weather conditions from the northeast, the sea states too challenging, there's always an option to race down on course E. The length of the courses that you're looking at there, they're about 1.5 miles in length, and they're about 0.6 of a mile wide, so they're really short and they're really compressed. This is similar to the length of the courses that we used in Bermuda, but we're sailing a bigger, faster boat here in Auckland. Again, it's more challenging for the sailors. It's going to be more of a spectacle. It'll make the racing closer. The real draw of this kind of course is that we want to try and make a stadium-type atmosphere. So all the spectators that are on the water will be able to line the boundary of those courses right up to those lines as drawn, and the racing will happen all inside that small area. Spectators, will obviously there'll be thousands of boats out there, I would imagine, will always be remaining stationary during racing. We'll have to lock down that whole area. The boats couldn't keep up with the yachts anyway, so the idea is you go out there, you park for the day, and you watch the racing. A lot of work to do with the harbour master yet about transit channels, opening up areas that the ferries can keep commuting during all the racing periods. The plan at this stage was to try and make the racing around 4 p.m. in the afternoon, which again is quite a big change from the norm. If you can think back to the 2000, 2003, there was a lot of days that were lost through lack of wind, waiting for the breeze to come in. So we're trying to move around that, because quite often by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, either a northeast sea breeze or a southwest sea breeze has jumped over from the west coast, and you normally will always have breeze at that time of the day. So we think it's a lot more attractive to have reliable racing at that time of the day. Also works a little bit better for European television. Just to give you a little background on the boat characteristics have come a long way since we were last here. The boat's turned out to be a pretty spectacular piece of equipment, and the longer we design and the more time we spend on it, the more excited we are about the concept that we've chosen. The boat will be able to fully foil in 7 knots of wind, so not a lot of wind. It's capable of doing around 35 knots of boat speed upwind into the wind, that means, and 45 knots plus downwind, so it's going to be quite spectacular. We'll set these courses to try and be around the 30 to 35 minute mark. So again, longer than Bermuda, but shorter than the traditional yacht races that used to go on for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So kind of be action-packed. And the amount of laps that the boats will do in those short courses will be totally dependent on wind speed and boat speed. Boats more or less capable of doing a complete lap in around 6 minutes, so not a lot of time. Just like to move on now, talk a little bit about the challenges. So last Friday, Friday the 30th, was the close of the late entry period. This was to allow, there was the initial entry period that closed some months ago. This was a late period to allow new teams to establish themselves and get themselves organised to enter. Been somewhat overwhelmed with the 8 new challenges that arrived at the office last Friday, 3 of them in the last 5 minutes. It's fair to say we'd been actively working with 6 of them, so it wasn't a complete surprise. We'd been working with some of these teams for over 6 months to try and encourage them into the event. As of today, there's 2 of those challenges that are immediately capable of acceptance. Immediate acceptance means that all their requirements under the deed of gift and the protocol have been met. That means that their yacht club's been verified and fills the requirements, which are things like the yacht club's been in existence for more than 3 years. They have a minimum membership of 200. They operate as a yacht club, not just a social club, and they have to be a member of the National Sailing Authority. We also have a good portion of what we're calling conditional entries. And conditional entries means they are looking for variations of what is set out in the entry documents. And that might be a condition such as they would like a World Series regatta or a pre-regatta that we're running next year and the year after in their home port. They might be looking for different terms on entry payments. It's all those kinds of things. Now, any time there's a change to the requirements of the protocol or an amendment to the protocol, that means we then have to go through a process of getting agreement with the challenger of record. It's not a decision we can make by ourselves. So all of these teams come from credible yacht clubs. So although we're cautious, we're very respectful of the entries that they've put in. They've put a huge amount of effort and taken a big step, taken a lot of courage to actually put their entry in. So we're treating them all with the respect they deserve. It's now a process that we're working through as quick as possible. We want to be able to tell the council and the government as quick as possible what the final numbers, or the final entry numbers are. Working on this now, we hope to have a lot of it done by next week or end of next week, but it could take up until Christmas until we get the final number confirmed. But I guess the message is, there's 2 that are capable of immediate acceptance, and we think there are definitely another couple that are possible. From our point of view, whatever happens from this point on, it's a great news story. And as Tina said earlier, I think it's a testament to the venue, the format, and all the work that's been done to encourage that many challenges to want to enter in Auckland. And for all the time I've been involved in the Cup, I've never seen such high numbers of challenges trying to enter. So that's my summary. Thank you.
And that really ends our presentation. So if you've got questions, I guess.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Tina. Perhaps it might be appropriate just to, while Kevin and Tina are at the front table, if there's any questions around the areas that they've covered, we might like to put those questions now. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kevin, could you just run by those definites that are set up for challenge and are okay to challenge, and the possibles, please?
The actual names of the teams?
No, just the numbers, please.
There's 2 definites.
Yep.
There's 6 that are conditional, and out of that 6, there is a few that we think will have the potential to fulfil their obligations to be definite.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, Tina, I've just been looking at your booklet. Where's Auckland Council listed as a major stakeholder? There's 4 4 local boards, 3 CCOs, the Mayor's office, and no Auckland Council on your page.
No, there's not, because we did it with Auckland Council, so they're throughout it.
Oh,
So this is why it's our document, if you like.
Okay, any, Councillor Bartley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thank you for your presentation. I want to pick up on how you said that this is going to be inclusive with free entry and on TV. I want to read you something off my Facebook page, and there is a question coming. Yeah, totally not a priority for me, my whānau, and our community. It's hypocrisy to think that the expenditure is justifiable simply because it will create revenue for the City of Sales. It will most likely cancel out any profit and definitely not add to the well-being of the people who need these funds the most. So my question to you is, how is this not just a rich man's race? What about our low-income communities? And that was from our Kapahaka group in Glen Innes. So, you know, what is the
answer to that? So I think the answer to that is, yes, there are wealthy people who are bringing their boats here, but the services and goods and products that those people will buy when they are here are produced by companies, many of which are on this list of 500, plus there's many more, which I haven't got documented, as I mentioned before, who actually employ people who live in Auckland and all parts of Auckland, and at many levels of skill and across a wide range of social situations. And I would hope that their Kapahaka group may be able to perform at the event as well.
Okay.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman. I don't understand
Councillor
your
Casey.
answer. Sorry, Tina. This is your book.
This is our document, but it was done with council. I think, oh sorry, I'll just have a,
There's no authorship on it.
no, what, no authorship.
No, it's got you at the front.
Yeah, it does. I'll just find the slide so I can specifically, because we also went to a whole lot of local boards.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah,
They're
we did.
listed. There's 4
Yeah.
local boards listed,
Yeah.
and there's 3 CCOs, and there's a Mayor's office, but there's no Auckland Council. It's just, given the decision we're making today, I would expected that we would be with the government one of your biggest stakeholders.
Well, it's Auckland Council Compliance and Regulatory Team, which I know doesn't cover the entire Auckland
That's
Council.
just a small section of
Yeah,
Auckland
yeah,
Council.
and the Waiheke Local Board. Look, if it's not there as a stakeholder in its own right, that is an oversight. But rest assured, the Auckland Council, both councillors and officers, have been intimately involved in the process of designing the event concept.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Filipaina.
Just a supplementary to Councillor Casey's one. So can I be assured then that Auckland Council will be put in with the stakeholders?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure, thank you.
Right. Councillor Hills.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I mean, I get that, but the Crown's not there either, and I assume it's because we're partners, not just stakeholders, because I'd hate for Council just to be a stakeholder in what is basically our own event.
That's correct. No, you are a partner, and so is the Crown, which is why really you're not identified as a specific group, which is what I was trying to say before. But the Crown has been intimately enrolled through numerous organisations and agencies.
Thank you. My other question is on things like, because I've been down to forums and other things to discuss jobs and apprenticeships and things like that, and you don't have all the information, but without putting commercial sensitivities in place, how much, when you say 13 spas or masts, what kind of money are you talking? Because the average person that could mean, oh, you just got a 13 mast, but I was hearing sort of figures that I was quite surprised at. And if you're 13 for what's signed up so far,
Yes.
quite a lot.
So masts, for example, typically on a boat like this are around $1 million each. So, and that's just the start of the services. The Southern Spas will be making more than those parts for the teams. There's all the rigging that goes on to holding the mast up. So, you know, there's another couple of $100,000 per mast of equipment to hold the mast up. So they're quite substantial numbers. A lot of people employed to build those masts. I think Southern Spars has a staff number of about 250. I'm not saying they're all going to be working on the America's Cup work, but a good portion of them will be.
And what you've obviously, and I've looked at this San Francisco, the economic and job impact there. It's a shame we don't have more figures, and like you say, maybe AT could do. I know MB's done some work, but what other? You've obviously got your team and building the boats, but what about? How does it look on the ground during the event and leading up to? So what kind of staff and people will you directly be employing, or the people you're connected to? What kind of services around the bases? And, you know, you're running an event, but what is it?
Oh, so that from an event point of view, we expect to have about 100 staff as we get to the event opening, just for the event. And we expect a whole heap of volunteers as well. Obviously, they don't generate income, but there will be a significant number of people employed. They're not employed at this point because actually there's nothing for them to do right now. But as we go through the process of gearing up, past the planning stage, we'll be employing a number, at least 50 or 60 people.
Thank you. And have you spoken to the interested parties and what their kind of estimated numbers they might be employing, or when they'll be likely to move here, and what, obviously a lot of might be funded offshore, but what kind of investment are they looking to make into the city when they come here?
With individual teams, are you talking about?
Yeah.
Well, I can answer that probably a little bit. For example, there's 2 of the teams already who are confirmed, who are trying to get down here immediately after the base sites are ready. So August next year, 2 of the major teams, they're already here looking at architects, talking to builders. They plan to start construction immediately, then to be based here in Auckland next summer. So coming down as soon as they can. So that's a fairly large project, I would imagine, and they need to start straight away.
And you'll be building all the bases with local labour and...
They're here talking to local labour and local builders, yes, local architects.
Cool, and those are all being funded by the teams themselves?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question. If we spend an additional 14.5 million of ratepayers' money, what additional economic value do Aucklanders get back above and beyond what we were going to get anyway?
I don't think I can answer that question, actually.
Maybe I can pick up on that when we go into staff presentation and our view on total cost versus budget and economic benefit.
I suppose the converse question to that is, if we weren't to be able to build the infrastructure required, what would be the consequences of that?
I think originally the budgets were set on the basis of a number of teams coming to Auckland, and I think the number of bases that was 7 in total, including us.
7, including us, was what we discussed earlier in the year. And the way the entry system works, if these teams meet their entry requirements by the 30th of November, we're obliged to accept them. Now, as there has always been only 6 challenger bases, it's kind of first in, best dressed. If you're number 7, your entry at that point will be conditional on us being able, or them being able to find their own space at that point.
I guess the problem is this, that the government has made an agreement already to put another 22.5 million in, but it is contingent on our agreement as a council to put 14.5 million in. If we were to make a decision not to put that 14.5 million in, and they therefore would not be making their contribution, where would that leave the America's Cup?
I think we'd have to have a very serious and many conversations about what the options are as a result of that.
But there is a risk that the Cup would be in jeopardy in Auckland.
Absolutely.
Okay. I've just got, if there's no other questions around the table, you mentioned, was it 100,000 visitors that you're expecting to come during the course of the
Each day.
Each day?
Peak days, not each of the 50 days.
On each of the racing days?
Peak days.
Yeah, okay. What's the, I mean, just from your past experience, what was the level of visitors to Auckland in 1999, 2003? I mean, what sort of numbers were you talking about overall, both from other parts of New Zealand, from around Auckland and from around the world? Do you have any idea of?
No, I can't answer that question. Sorry, it's not information I have, but I can get it.
Yeah, that would be interesting. But in terms of the jobs created, I think the estimate from MB is 4,700 to 8,400. What sort of jobs are they largely? I mean, you've mentioned some of them, which is in the direct boat building industry, and those are basically trade jobs and labouring jobs. What comprises the rest of the potentially up to 8,000, 8,500 jobs that will be created as a result of the America's Cup? Can you throw some light on that, or is that something else I'd have to put to ATEED?
There is probably something. I mean, I can take a guesstimate because it's how long is a piece of string. So if you're looking at super yachts, for example, there's a lot in the marine sector, but there's also a lot in their day-to-day servicing. So providing of the food and beverages, all the services that they will look to have on board and hosting of their guests, and so on and so forth. So there's sections, if you like, right across the whole supply chain of the entire event. So the list is actually endless, whether you're talking about flowers, whether you're talking about babysitters, whether you're talking about car servicing, transport, so on and so forth. So I can't be very detailed.
Tourist-related, boat building, construction, they'd be the main categories.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And hospitality, yeah.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions...
Just a brief
sorry,
one.
Councillor Fletcher.
I'm delighted with the proposal that the race start time be around 4 p.m. I see all sorts of benefits that will come with that, and I can understand from a practical point of view with wind conditions and I suppose media coverage with European television. What's the impact likely to be, Tina, on crowd? Because I mean, people are going to be really attracted to coming into the inner city because they are later starts. Have you given thought to that, what the impact might be? Yes,
we have, and we've done a lot of work on that and still more to go, but working with the city, with Auckland Transport, and ATEED, and in fact all CCOs around this, looking at traffic management, and the police have been involved as well. So there's a lot of planning going into what is the impact going to be. One of the basic things we do know is that particularly on peak days, people want to be together with other people to watch those races. Now they're either going to be down in the village itself watching on the screens or at a number of the activation sites which will be around the city, and we're talking about, for example, with and Ngāti Whātua looking at Bastion Point being an obvious one, still will need screens because everybody wants to watch it on television. So they'll either be static on the water with people, their families or their work colleagues if it's during a work day in the city, which has the greatest impact from a traffic point of view, and they will be not moving until those races are over. So there's impact on normal traffic flows in terms of commuters. Those people that are not interested in the racing will actually have a freer run home than they normally would. As you know, when the Rugby World Cup's on and a big game's on, people just don't go on the road. So a lot of work has been done around that. A lot of work's been done around how do we manage the spectator boats in particular, and how do we keep order as far as that's concerned, because there are a lot more boats around in Auckland now than there were last time the Cup was here. So yes, a huge amount of work going on to looking at exactly that point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, if I can, on behalf of... Oh, I'm sorry, Josephine. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't really happy with your response to my question, and so I'm trying to, because Council's already invested in it, I'm trying to find a way to kind of chip away at America's Cup being this rich man's sport, and I want to see if there is any commitment on your part to any opportunities that could be given to our communities that don't normally, aren't your traditional, you know, they don't normally do the America's Cup thing. So I'm thinking of our low-income communities. Are you open to that?
Absolutely.
What opportunities, besides jobs, besides open entry to the event, what else could you
Okay, so we're talking with, at the moment, a number of organisations, including the Ministry of Education, in terms of putting a schools program together, an accessible countrywide schools program, to look at what learnings, what opportunities does the America's Cup bring up for educating young people and inspiring young people. Because the America's Cup isn't just about sailing boats, it's about innovation, it's about courage, it's about technology, it's about our history, where we came from, and our relationship with the sea. So there is a lot of work going on in that regard. I don't know if that specifically addresses what you're referring to, but we do know that young people are inspired, and from all walks of life, by our young sailors, for example, the Pete Burlings and the Blair Chooks, who don't come from rich, wealthy backgrounds. They come from places like we come from, by the sea, and they learnt to sail on little tiny sailing boats, and their parents helped them, you know, at the local yacht club, as many children have, and not all children, I accept, have that opportunity. Children through the education program, and we will make that very inclusive, which will be a big piece of work, will hopefully benefit from some of the experiences, the learnings, and as I said, the inspirations that come from the stories inherent in the America's Cup.
Can I just add and just say, you know, I think it's an absolute myth that the America's Cup is a rich man's sport. We've heard that for years, and it is not a true statement. Yes, there are wealthy people that are involved in funding the teams, but that's about it. Like, the people that are in these teams and spend their lives doing this competition are not rich people, they are normal people. They come from normal backgrounds and they're just committed to a sport. So it's a little bit of a misconception that it keeps getting called that.
Or they're committed to a specific skill that is being applied to the sport. So some of the designers and people that we have in our own team, they're committed to the sport now, but originally they were committed to actually whether it's mathematics or some form of engineering. So what the America's Cup offers is an opportunity for many people to apply their skill in something that is an old sport. So I think if we look at it that way, then you start to unpeel the layers and layers of opportunity that are there.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've just got to say, having participated in the last parade for the America's Cup, and we had, I think, on a pretty average day in terms of weather, 90,000 people out in the streets. And to me, insofar as you can tell, without interviewing everybody, it looked pretty much like a cross-section of New Zealanders, ethnically, age-wise, where people had come from, the people I did talk to, all over Auckland, and they made a special effort to come in. Look, thank you very much for your presentations, much appreciated. You're welcome to stay, and if you do, you may be asked questions in the final session, so I don't know whether that's a disincentive to stay, but really appreciate your time today and appreciate the energy and enthusiasm you're putting into the Cup contest. I think what all of us see is a racecourse inshore, a village in the heart of the city. This could be the best ever America's Cup anywhere in the world, and that's the promise of what the Cup could deliver to Tamaki Makaurau. So thank you very much for that. And if I can ask Megan Tyler and Barry Potter, please, to come to the table to join Dean and give us an update on the other aspects, including the concern that all of us have, which is about, obviously, the change from the original estimates and costings. So, Dean, you're going to take us through an initial presentation.
Yes, so thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, councillors. So we have a refined presentation. We had the opportunity to discuss the other day a number of issues, but the objective, to be clear today, is to seek approval for an additional 14.5 million to ensure we can deliver on our obligations with respect to the America's Cup infrastructure, that 14.5 being our half share. Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So look, if you recall, I think all but most of you were here for the March 29th decision and approval for budget. You'll see up there on your screens the Wynyard Hobson proposal. This came out of a significant number of months of work leading up to that point once we had concluded negotiations with America's Cup Events Limited. What you see on that screen, though, is the subject of a number of design iterations. That was the Wynyard Hobson option, but up to that point, there were 5 other options that we considered over the space of about 5 months. There was, for example, the Hobson and Halsey only option with a significant extension of Hobson. There was the, should we just do it on Wynyard Point option only? Should we do a combination of Wynyard and Halsey and Hobson? And we've ended up with the Wynyard Hobson proposal. It was based on that option, your approval in March, that we then sought resource consent. That resource consent was granted in September. The pleasing thing was it was granted 4 months ahead of schedule and with no objections attached to it. So what do we get out of that investment? So I want to talk about 2 things here. One is, what is the legacy of that infrastructure investment? And I want to talk about how we got to that legacy. So out of this investment, 123 plus the additional funding from Crown and Council, which would take it up to 152 million, there is an extension to Hobson Wharf. This creates additional open space in that environment, which will allow that to be used for on-water type sports, not just the America's Cup. But currently we don't have a quiet water space at the scale that would benefit Wakarama or other water-based sports. So we create an environment that we can use and additional open space. It removes the tanks on Wynyard Point. So this is a significant leap forward on what we had previously planned around creating an open space on Wynyard Point. We've all seen the master plan that Panuku previously proposed. This has brought that day forward by 6 or 8 years. It's increased the public access, as I've talked about. It's provided that sheltered space. It's also provided an upgrade to Wynyard Wharf. Elements of that needed to be remediated anyway. We've brought that investment forward and it's enhanced its use and availability for public activation purposes. It will also allow us to deal with some water quality improvements in the viaduct basin, whether from redirecting of stormwater, but even the dredging of that area increases and improves water quality. There's been a number of discussions around, well, how did we end up with needing an additional 29 million? And I'd just like to cover off very quickly and very simply the journey we went through. For about 4 months we went through a number of iterations, up to and including the March one, the Wynyard Hobson option. That was happening at pace. We had 5 options. We probably had many variations within those, and we had 3 or 4 times that in terms of cost estimates. Things were happening rapidly. The Wynyard Hobson option that you approved was actually landed and agreed between Crown Council and America's Cup Events Limited maybe a week before we came into this room and sought your approval. From that point, we then took that concept post your approval with a budget of 123 million and we worked up the detailed design. That detailed design process has gone on over the last 6 months. We've looked at construction program, we've looked at costings, and we've looked at design. At one point, and this is normal for a project like this, we got to something that was over 200 million for the delivery of that infrastructure. We then worked very, very hard with Emirates Team New Zealand, very open environment, to take cost out. That pulled it back to where we think we now have the true cost of that Wynyard Hobson option, which is 152 million. That true cost picks up on some of the items that we didn't fully understand at that time. One example being dredging, which is now some 14 million more than our original budget. So the proposal today reflects more accurately the true cost. At the time there was discussion around that in March. Today we share with you what we believe the true cost of that proposal is, and we can talk on the way through, perhaps as in question time, around the confidence we have in that cost and the role of contingency in it. And on that note, so I'm not handling the pointer at all well today, the optimised plan. So I've talked about the legacy infrastructure, and on this you'll see on your screens the optimised plan. So you can see the extension to Hobson, and Barry will talk in some of this in more detail around the fact that we've taken some of that surface area out as part of our cost optimisation. You'll see the breakwaters and the wave protection around Hobson, similarly through Halsey and on to Wynyard Point. You'll see on this there are redesigned breakwaters. They are narrower and they are less, they've reduced in length as part of our cost optimisation. Down Wynyard Point, instead of complete infill, we've got hit and miss panels. Quite clearly, if you're putting in less panels, it's going to cost less, and that was the objective. We've taken fixed breakwaters and we made them floating wherever possible. We do have a small reduction in Hamer Street and a couple of the breakwaters, but ultimately we've worked through the design criteria. We've landed on what you see there as the optimised plan upon which our cost estimate is based, and I've been able to share with you the legacy outcomes that we get, the residing infrastructure that's available post this defence of the America's Cup and any future ones. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Barry, who's going to talk you through the cost optimisation process.
So just perhaps before we go on to that, the floating breakwaters is still an option that's being considered. It hasn't been landed yet, so that's a potential. It's still being looked at. There's a few other things that changed on the way through as well. In the early days, when the Alliance came on board, the Wynyard Edge Alliance, which came on board in March and through April was really when it was going, it became clear that construction time frame was going to be a real issue on this project, and that there was a likelihood of potential that we would not miss the date, we would not hit the target dates. And quite a bit of work was done on looking at options for speeding up that construction time frame, and it became clear that the easiest way, the most effective way of doing that was to reduce the number of piles, because piling is a very slow process. So original estimates had quite a different structure, and you don't see it in the layout here, but it's underneath. The actual structural form of these changed from cast in situ topping, concrete, for Hobson Wharf, supported on piles at about 6 metre centres. Cast in situ means that you put down your formwork and pour fresh concrete on top, and there were about 600 diameter piles at 6 metre centres. Now that number of piles, driving that number of piles, was not going to allow the project to hit its time frames. And so looked at alternatives for that, and the design now is much larger pile spacing, much larger piles, and to speed up the construction, gone to precast. So it's quite a different structural form. That applies to breakwaters, where breakwaters are quite different to what was originally envisaged. And so trying to compare the original design to what we now have, though you look at the layout, it's actually very different. Different equipment is required. Going to the larger piles and to precast means that a large barge was required, which I'm not sure, it might have arrived here already, or it's very close to here, and a substantial crane that goes on that. as well as precasting up in Whangarei. So that's quite a substantial change. Questions have been asked about a couple of elements here. What parts of this don't become part of the long-term legacy? What parts are removed? And there's really two parts that that don't remain. The first of those, and they're on Wynyard Point. The first is that one of the changes is not infilling the slot down Wynyard Point. That was fully infilled down there. And through here, the optimised solution is to construct temporary structural steel bridges across that slot to allow the boats to be moved backwards and forwards. So they have a 10-year life, be removed, and the cost of those is in the order of $8 to $8.5 million. The other element that would be removed is that the Alliance provides a flat surface for the bases on Wynyard Point. Now that will be asphalt is what's anticipated, what's being planned for that. And that would be removed. The syndicates build the foundations and the design and build the foundations and the buildings that go on that. That asphaltic concrete, which would be removed at some point, and that's in the order of $1 to $1.5 million. So that's the kind of quantum of spend that wouldn't form part of the long-term legacy. So there's a few points to make here. It was an interesting time. What was happening is there are multiple cost estimates. There is no single cost estimates. Cost estimates were being formed. Look, I did a count yesterday, and I think I stopped it. There's at least, I counted a dozen, and there are others that I didn't land on, because what's happening is the design is evolving. The cost estimate is then prepared, by which stage design options have moved on or questions are being asked. There are cost estimates for different elements that were changing rapidly as the structural forms and the different requirements were. So, and look, I'd welcome the opportunity to share that with people who want to see it, but it has to be understood in context, because there is no single cost plan at that time. This has been a moving feast. As Dean was outlining the pace at which the design was moving. So it is, though we've got numbers that we relate back to, you can't do a line by line, because that's not how it was evolved. So we went through that process there, and we talked about as the design became more certain, as information became available, and here we're talking about information that wasn't available to the original estimating team. They did not have great information on levels through that area. They didn't have great geotechnical information. They didn't know what the level of contamination was. And all those, they made assumptions as they had to make assumptions, and a number of those assumptions did not carry through to, they were turned against us. So what happened was that about 3 months ago, it became clear that we had some significant cost pressures, and went through an optimisation process. This is quite normal for infrastructure works. And considerable work was done to reconfigure, working with Team New Zealand to look at options, different ways of taking money out. And of course, the easiest way of taking money out of a project is do less of it. And so that drove some of the reductions we now have. And that gets us to the point where we are now, where we are seeking $14.5 million additional investment. So taking on board all of the things I was saying around the challenges of actually doing direct comparisons between structures that are quite different, and methodologies that are construction methodologies that are quite different, we try and see where the differences are now. And I've talked about the construction time frame, how that drove a different design around piling and precast. The areas where we still have the greatest variances are around dredging. where the original estimates were around about 50 to 55,000 cubic metres of dredging required. We now know that that's around 70 to 75,000 cubic metres of dredging. Original estimates were assuming particular contamination levels. We now have done quite a bit of testing, and still more testing is required on that. Of the 70 to 75,000 cubic metres, about 20,000 cubic metres of that we are hoping to be able to dispose of up Cuvier behind Great Barrier Island, but some additional testing is required on that to demonstrate, to prove what the materials are that will be disposed of there. Outside of that, it then requires disposing to landfill, given the nature of it. So dredging has been an item that has been a real challenge because we didn't have the information before. We've talked about cost increases on Hobson Wharf related to needing to speed up construction, changing breakwaters. The original breakwaters were designed without the opportunity to do substantial modelling of the kind of environment that they create, and that's really important to get wave heights and so on and so forth in that sheltered area right. That work takes quite some time to do it, so substantial modelling, and that's now been done. So that's where we are, and we're now looking at that around 152 million. Now, of course, the Alliance has been running to meet timeframes, and work is already committed. So the work that's already been done and work that is committed, contracts that are committed in regard to the design, which is very well progressed. The construction methodologies are now established, how to go about the project, weren't there before. There's far more detailed cost estimation than there was ever available or could be done beforehand. And we've had to do pre-ordering of materials, particularly around long lead items, structural or steel rolling for piles, reinforcement and precast. There's also quite a bit of equipment that has been ordered because of delivery times for that, so barges and crane and workboats and so on and so forth. And that totally comes to date, somewhere around about 31, 33 million. This is moving, of course, as time goes on.
Okay, thanks Barry, and we'll stop very soon for questions, Your Worship, but next steps, in anticipating approval from the governing body for the additional investment, and then maybe I should reflect on what if the answer is no. But if the answer is yes from the governing body, then that allows us to enter an unconditional project alliance agreement. Currently working on a conditional one that says if we do not get this approval, then effectively we'll have to stop work. So if we get the approval, we can enter an unconditional one, and the Alliance can continue full steam to deliver the required work. So we have that clause in there that allows us to stop. And that's effectively what would happen if you chose today not to approve the additional funding, because we couldn't enter into any more commitments related to the build of the infrastructure without that approval for funding. So we would be able to sign up to the Project Alliance Agreement unconditionally. We would enter into the host venue agreement, which is our commitment to deliver the whole program. And Panuku will also lodge some amendments to the consent conditions that pick up on that optimised design. So on that note, we'll finish, and we're happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean and Barry, for that presentation. Can I just lead off with a question? I'd like to acknowledge your success in reducing the costs from what it could have been. Cutting it by 70 million is a pretty impressive effort. If the original cost estimates had been out by 29 million, I would understand that. Cost estimates are not a science. We've seen that with RCR, Tomlinson, Corbell in the last week, Ebert, Fletcher's disastrously out in their cost estimates. But the original cost estimates were 100 million out. And I find it really hard to accept we employed in good faith a private sector consultancy that was out by that order of magnitude. And I've listened to the explanation, but I'm still not satisfied that the original job was done as well as it ought to have been out by that level. What comfort can you give me that we've learnt some lessons from that we're not simply going to repeat the same problems in another project or set of projects in the future?
Perhaps if I start.
You start.
And then Dean can come in behind. There's some things with that are unique to civil infrastructure works. In those, as opposed to building works, so speaking particularly to civil infrastructure, the construction methodology drives much of the cost. And it depends on what kit you have, how you're going to go about it, what plant you own. And of course, in the early days, the cost estimator on this did not have access to that. So a lesson out of this is bring on construction teams or construction advice early into the process. Also understand this is a very fast-track process that we've gone through here, extraordinarily fast-track. And it needs time to develop first estimates, then do more work, do a stock take on those estimates, how you're going to build it, what goes on, then move on. Most infrastructure projects follow quite a structured approach to stopping, checking, and re-evaluating. That didn't happen on this case because of timeframes. You just could not do it.
So if I can amplify a couple of things. One is it was fast track. We were under pressure as Auckland and New Zealand to sign a host city agreement so we could secure the right to host the America's Cup. As part of that decision-making process, we had to find a venue that we thought met the collective expectations of the Crown and Council. We went through that conceptualising process at pace. We had 5 concepts. We landed on one. We did so in March. The preferred concept was landed about a week before we came to the governing body. So look, we're not pleased that it was 100 million out, but if I think we just wind the clock back and reflect on where we're at in that process, we would like more time to have got the construction methodology in place and the design wrapped around that preferred option. We didn't have it to meet our own expectations of certainty. My other recommendation would be, under a fast-track process, that the approval from the governing body would reflect the risk and the uncertainty. We had a finite sum that was approved, and we have worked extremely hard to land on that number. But the uncertainty was greater at that stage than what a finite sum represented. And so I think one of the maturing that we have to go through, the staff advising us, to be more explicit around what the risk is on those numbers. And we talked about, in that governing body meeting, we talked about a budget being approved. At that stage, it was quite clear we hadn't landed on the cost. We did not expect it to be 100 million out, not at all. And we pulled it back to what we believe the correct number is to reflect the value of the infrastructure that's now being proposed in the timeframes.
Thank you. My other question is, I think there's more than a few of us around the table that are worried that there could be a future escalation of costs. And I really want your assurance, given, one, you now have the detailed design and cost calculations you didn't have originally. 2, you've built in a third of that extra amount that we're spending is in contingency. And 3, you've got a cost benefit sharing arrangement with the Wynyard Edge Alliance. So if the costs go up, they share in the costs. If they go down, they share in the benefits. On the basis of those 3 things, what sort of assurance can you give us that this is the last time you come back to us to ask us for any money?
Certainly hope that's the case, but there is no guarantee. We're working in the marine environment.
In the water.
Don't
blame the sea for this one.
That is certainly the aim and objective, and we believe we've got things lined up for that. the unexpected or, can happen, and we don't know.
Yeah, look, so I agree with Barry. We can't provide a guarantee, and we get asked this question a lot, can we provide a guarantee? We can't provide a guarantee. We would love to provide a guarantee. But our assurance to you as a governing body is that there's 2 or 3 things in here that I think are worth us all understanding. First of all, the Alliance has signed up to this as a target cost. We didn't have that before. We've got an independent estimator in the form of Bond CM who have agreed that that number, the 152 million, represents the value of the work and represents some of the risk around that, okay? Not the extreme risk, but the risk around that. We have built contingency into this number, something we didn't have before. So we're in a very different place. We've done the detailed design, we've got the construction methodology, we've got a team that signed up on it in the form of the Alliance, we've got an independent estimator that agrees, and we've got a contingency in that. So our assurance is we have far greater assurance. We're in a very different place to where we were in March.
Okay, thanks. I think that's probably going to be as good as it gets from the answer. I've got a list of questions now. Councillor Sayers, you're first up.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. My question's probably around the funding of the 14.5 million. Will that come from borrowings, or will that come from delaying or stopping projects that already have a green light?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Sayers. So, as we say in our report, paragraph 54, this will be debt funded, and it'll be considered as part of the overall annual plan budget process. So you'll be looking at all the demand on all capital. But what we also recognise is that we have a limit on how much we can invest from a capital perspective. So it's 2 things. It'll be debt funded, but the second thing is a limit on total capital. And our recommendation is that in the event we need to, then you look to the city centre waterfront capital program over the next 10 years, of which there's in the order of $1 billion worth of investment, and you manage it within inside that portfolio. That is the right place to address the trade-offs in investment.
If I could just ask a follow-on question from that,
certainly,
Your Worship. So that's that bucket, those projects you've just mentioned around the waterfront, that seems like quite a geographically succinct bunch of projects there.
Correct.
Is there a way we can have that reflected in the resolutions?
So we have prepared a draft resolution. Sorry.
Can I just, perhaps I'm best placed to answer that. I've received an amendment, a new G from Councillor Newman, which is actually consistent with what Dean has just said, and I'm quite happy with it, that says the debt impact of additional capital spend of 14.5 million will be considered as part of the annual budget 2019-2020 process, and should any rephasing of budgets be required, this would come from the wider city centre budget. I'm quite happy with Councillor Newman's concurrence to accept that from the Chair as part of the resolution. Yep. I think that was signalled to us in the workshop earlier in the week, and I think it makes sense. Yep. And Chairman of the Finance and Performance Committee's nodding, so that's always a good sign.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher.
No, you asked my question.
Oh, great. Making great progress. Councillor Casey.
My questions won't come as a surprise because I've now asked them in the workshop, I've asked them in writing, and some of them still haven't been answered, so I'm going to ask them again. Following on from what the Mayor said, who was the consultant that was 100 million out?
The cost consultants in the early days were WT Partnership. That then changed through the appointment of the Alliance onto the Alliance with Bond CM as our independent advisors, experts.
Are we still using them?
WT Partnerships, I'm not sure. Look, I think we also, we just need to look at the context in which they were doing their work as well.
I think the Mayor's expressed, at least the way I feel, there's a difference between a small blowout and a 100 million blowout. Yeah. My second question, it relates to something you've just said, Barry, and something you responded to me in writing as well, and that is that you can't do a line by line because that's not how it evolved. Can we just put the table up, and that's this table at the end?
It's not me. While we're pulling out that page, can I just add in, we've been reluctant to name individual organisations because when you get a challenge like the additional cost against a concept design, there are many parties involved in that. And so it's not whether it's just quantity server 1 or 2. We have designers, we've got contractors, we've got council staff, we've got planners. And so I think to name one organisation and let the heat fall there would be unfair. I think we all take the heat on that. And so that would be my supplementary comment to that challenge, Councillor Casey.
Just to be fair, it's we who take the heat on that, Dave.
Yeah.
My second question,
It's
that's just a political statement. If you look at this table, you said, and I quote, I can't do a line by line because that's not how it evolved. Now, forgive me, you know, each one of those final tallies on the right-hand side, I understand about the apples and pears, you can't compare them, I've got that, but if you take that last column, are you telling me you cannot, and I've asked for it, you cannot provide me a breakdown? For example, what under the other category, and the public's looking at this saying, oh, others just gone up from 1.2 to 1.8. Of course you can tell me what's in other. You can give it line by line, you can add them up and make that final total, can't you? And if you can, why haven't you?
If you look at the final cost plan that we have now, it is substantial, and I would welcome the opportunity to meet with you and actually show what we've got, because there are multiple cost plans that we're evolving. Other includes site establishments, more power, fencing, multiple stuff that is in there. When you come down to things like Hobson Wharf and breakwaters, there are barges and kit cranes that operate on both. Allocating costs directly to elements becomes very difficult. The original estimates were based on basically square metre unit rates, because they had no construction methodology. So they're using best information available based on rates and labour rates. Now, as the construction methodology and more detail comes in and more knowledge about things like extent of dredging and ground conditions, you get more information and you start building it up on how you're actually going to build it. So it is a different approach.
Okay, my next question is from Councillor Hills.
Hey, thank you, Chair. I guess for me this is process, right? So I understand everything that's happened and everything that is going to happen, and we kind of don't have a choice, so we're starting from there. But the other issue is, and I think it's probably, and you've said, the Mayor said, you know, around private companies are having the same issues around cost escalation or getting things out of kilter. But we, in fact, unanimously supported several options at the time that were far greater than this, the cost now, and even the decisions in December, we supported options that are far greater than this cost that we're increasing to now. So that's something we have to think of. But my concern from a political and kind of process point of view is it's like we squared it down from some of those prices and we've just had to bounce back up. And we've now going to expend a whole lot of energy and capital and probably debate getting not even back to where we were. You know, there was up to 270 million at one point, there was discussions. So how in the future, or how could, and it's a little bit of waste of time, I know, talking about it, but it's trying to understand, or trying to get the public to understand, why could we not have put a, you know, 98 to 130 million, you know, why wasn't there scope when actually originally we were talking about far greater costs from council back when we all supported those options unanimously, and now bringing it back and sort of relitigating it is probably missing the point. But why couldn't we have said to the public then, or is that just not how our budgets and things work?
What you've outlined in very simple terms, Councillor Hills, is our advice to you. When we're at that very early stage, our advice to you will be you need to allow for, in your budget setting, for a particular project like this, and this is quite unique in the way it's been handled through the governing body, you need to provide for uncertainty. And unfortunately, the process we went through for setting a budget for this was a finite number in an environment where there was significant uncertainty. So our advice for next time would be budget for that uncertainty and give us some parameters to work within.
And so would there have been a... So my opinion would have been we should have shot for the higher number and worked our way back, but that probably, I assume, may not have happened. The other question I have is around, the biggest costs seem to be on the dredging and the infrastructure. The dredging went up 14 million, so basically you could say that's our extra cost we're paying. I guess two things. Is there any way that we could have done any of that work without securing the project to begin with? So it's probably how much you would cost to do that work without actually going ahead with or would we not have been able to do that work before?
I think we're under time pressure to agree with, I don't recall all the dates, others may do, but there was some real and fair time pressure for us to make commitments for the Holding of the America's Cup. We need to make decisions, and so we in good faith, dealt with that in the order that we'd agreed with the Crown and Emirates Team New Zealand. Just one other comment about the number, going for a high number. This might sound slightly contradictory, but it's useful to have a number that puts discipline and rigour into your design construction methodology process. So we're not afraid of hard numbers, but in this case, we needed some tolerance. So I don't think we should have had the higher number either. You might end up with something that's more expensive today than what it needed to be. So pressure is a good thing, but some flexibility to move is also a good thing.
Thank you.
And sorry, the last question.
Last question.
Around so there's been suggestions throwing around, we'll just get Team New Zealand or someone else to pay for this. This is, and I don't think we've really explained this to the public properly, is this is all our infrastructure long term. We're not building physical bases and sheds and things. This is, so we couldn't get anyone else to fund it, is that, am I right?
So we've reflected on that, and our view is that the nature of the public infrastructure you're providing at this stage is to get the wharfing structure and the platforms on Wynyard in place. You're correct. Anything above that is the responsibility of the syndicates. Could a private sector have contributed to the cost of that basic infrastructure? My view is at this stage it's a hard sell to the private sector on the basis that we need to protect that for future defences. So at this point in time, maybe not. In the future, there may be an option there, and we've seen the leverage that we got when we've done, on balance, other parts of waterfront. We saw what we got as a result of that initial capital injection and how it freed up development opportunities. So the view is we'll achieve the same. The public sector leads, and that's the decision we've ended up making today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clow.
Yeah, three points. So we were talking about 30 million extra, and our share, or 29, is 14.5. If the government has given 22.5, why are we not putting in 6.5?
So the
29.
The additional capital cost associated with the infrastructure is 29 million. The agreement we have with the Crown is 50-50. That's why we're putting in 14.5. The Crown is putting in 14.5, but the Crown also needed to address some other of its budget obligations. So that's why they've sought approval for 22.5.
Yep. Okay.
And that 22.5 is their 14.5, same as ours.
Okay. And can you just explain exactly the amount of the contingency built into the overall?
It's around 6.5%.
6.5% from the total budget.
That's of the total amount, so the contingency of just under $10 million, I think. So the contingency is a third of the 29 million extra that we're putting in. I think it's quite important to see that in context.
And just the mentioning of the steel bridges, effectively, and they would come out in 10 years' time. Why would they come out? Are we going to take part of that wharf apart at some stage, or why would they not be a permanent feature and therefore part of permanent infrastructure? And again, more legacy investment.
part of me wants to comment that everything that we do temporary seems to become permanent, but these here are designed as temporary structures. There is a desire to maintain that slot through there from public realm. The bridges are in there for a particular purpose. We have a 10-year consent, so it's related to that. They may stay on there later. That's the design life that we have gone for those bridges.
So, sorry, I was just a little bit confused, so, because I'm just trying to memorise from being down there and looking at it, you know, there's obviously a gap between, you know, whatever, these poles and the main wall. What, are we going to take those poles out eventually?
That's the intention, is to take them out eventually at the end. It's not part of the permanent works, permanent legacy.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Got a few questions. I might know the answers to some of them, but I'm going to ask them anyway, okay, because they're useful. First question I've got is around the escalation in costs. And as you've pointed out, the biggest by far escalation in cost is the dredging. So has that escalation come about because our dredging relates to the original area that we had identified for dredging? But have we got significant scopes creep, and are we having to dredge other areas that we had not anticipated?
It's not about dredging other areas, it's about the quantity that has to be dredged from those areas. So there wasn't great information on the amount of material there. So that's really where it's come from. It's not about expanding the area that needs to be dredged. And it's also about disposal of the materials and the nature of the materials that's there.
I understand. So then if we had not identified the area, so the area was the same, it follows then that the difference is the depth of the dredging. Yep. Why had we not identified the additional depth of the dredging? Because we should have known what the seafloor was, so why was that?
Well, there wasn't great sounding information of what the actual depths were through there, what the ground conditions were. I think they might actually have to go out a bit further to the north than was originally anticipated as well, because of information around there and the requirements of the boats to have certain depths. As part of the optimisation, as I recall, those depths changed back again to reduce some of the dredging costs. But it was just in the early days, there was not that information to the detailed level that was required to do.
Okay, well, I guess my reason for concern is it's a staggering increase. It's quite obviously a very significant increase in depth, and I would have thought that was something pretty basic that somebody would have picked up, but I'll leave that for now. The other issue that I've got just goes to structures. So some of these structures I'm hearing from Councillor Clow aren't especially permanent, they're limited in their life, like the steel that's going over the slot and so on. And conceivably, if we could have a floating breakwater, that might not be a permanent structure.
That's correct, though all breakwaters can be moved, of course.
Sure.
But at the moment this has got the piled breakwaters in it.
So in an instance where we're normally debt funding long-term, for really long-term assets, and I would suggest some of these assets are not long-term assets, they may actually be rather short-term assets, and even the dredging in part might be a short-term asset if its purpose is purely for the length of the America's Cup challenge, which might be one duration, might be another duration. Is debt funding appropriate for all of our expenditure?
So we have a general policy perspective here at Council that capital works will be debt funded, but
I can get an answer to that later. I'm just raising it now because it goes to how we're funding this.
There is a trade-off between total capital cost and being able to drive some of that expense out through short-term or 10-year design life and long-term design life at an increased capital cost. So in part what you're hearing is we're making those trade-offs. If you want long life infrastructure down Wynyard Point, and you don't want hit and miss panels there, you want more than structural steel that can be pulled out in 10 years' time, well, you might be adding on X millions. So we've tried to make those trade-offs to pull cost out. It comes at the cost of shorter life.
Sure, okay, got that. The other question I've got just goes around the financial implications, and it's a question that Matthew Walker might be best to ask, and it goes like this. We say that the debt impact of the additional capital spend will be considered as part of the annual plan budget 2019-2020 process. And the concern I've got is if...
Yeah, keep going, Wayne. I think Matthew's listening.
And it's my understanding, I think it's the clear understanding of other councillors, that we're up to our debt limit. And if I'm making the assumption, and it may be wrong, that there actually isn't any revenue generation from this additional capital, so we're not getting anything back to help fund our cost of capital. What follows is that the debt implications of this project mean that we're going to actually have to pull debt funding of other projects. And I just want to get really clear on that, because that is the assumption I'm making. It's not here, but those assumptions are underlying as far as I'm concerned, and it would have been really good if they had have been here. So can you clarify that, Matthew? So we're up to our debt limit. We have to raise more debt for this project. We can't raise more debt, so it's going to come because we're not going to be debt funding other stuff.
So through the chair, I mean, what you're saying is broadly correct.
Okay,
and we will, we will, as with every year, we'll run our normal budget refresh process through March and April. So to ultimately answer the question, we need to let that budget refresh process run.
Sure.
Just to be clear, then what we can know with more precision than we precisely know today, because we can't do this in real time, we'll know exactly what our debt headroom looks like.
I understand that, but for something of this magnitude, it's highly likely that we're going to have to make cuts somewhere else. So there'll be a trade-off here. Okay, let's not go there, but that's the assumption that I'm making anyway, and I'm just reflecting that to the Mayor and councillors.
Thank you, Councillor. Look,
I'm not finished. I've got a few other questions.
I'm sorry, Councillor. I just want to remind everybody, it's not directed at you specifically. We had a set time available for this. It's important that I'm letting it run, and I will let it run. But we have 2 workshops this afternoon, so I just like people to try to be as concise as they can be. Otherwise, we're going to be here till rather late tonight doing workshops, and if that happens, actually people won't be here, and will defeat the purpose of the workshop. So can you just maybe come to a last question, Councillor?
So I guess my preference is that a meeting prioritises over a workshop, but that's just my personal preference, and I have a preference for this item because I think it's hugely significant. So I hope we have time for it. The other question I've got is not so much around cost optimisation, which you've covered somewhat, but revenue optimisation. And my concern goes like this. If it's the government that's optimising the revenue return, they're getting the GST, they're getting the income tax, they're benefiting from the reduction in unemployment and a whole raft of other stuff. Is there any prospect of getting any more money out of the government? And this is a national project. It's a New Zealand project, not an Auckland Council project. So I just want to put that question up. And then there's a related question, and that is, have we looked at any possibilities around revenue optimisation? For example, a targeted rate, because quite obviously the waterfront area, that catchment benefits significantly. Sponsorship on some of the objects that we're putting in, conceivably the portable breakwater, other things. There may be ways that we can generate some revenue, and given the significant numbers that Team New Zealand mentioned, 100,000 spectators, huge numbers of jobs, all sorts of things, it'd be nice to know if we, that is the council, could get something back.
Okay, I think there's some clear questions in that.
So I'm happy to start off, and I'm sure there may be some other contributions. So the way I look at this is, first of all, we have Market Economics has done a review of the economic benefit between 0.6 and 1 billion. So Aucklanders in general and New Zealand benefit from this, and that goes to individual employment, businesses, etc. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. Second point is we have considered other revenue sources. Super yachts would be an example. We've discussed that a number of times, where we have taken effectively that capital cost, we've unplugged it from your direct investment and said that needs to be self-funding. That would be a good example of the very issue that
Can we charge them more?
What we need to do is charge them a fair cost, and we're looking at that model, okay? And it'll be based on what the going rate is for that sort of boat, for that sort of environment over those periods. The third one is, I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that the Crown, in overall terms, including their event fee, is contributing more to this in real dollar terms than what we are. And so they are making a significant contribution. Before we asked for the additional 29 million, the total was 200, sorry, I'm doing this on the fly, 212 plus 29 equals about whatever it does, 241. And they are contributing 22.5 plus about 100, they're contributing 130, 140 of it. So let's not lose sight of it. They're making a significant contribution, and yes, they get returned through GST, taxes and others.
And just around the cost
very
side,
last question,
yeah, real
Councillor.
quick, around the cost side, can I have some kind of assurance that we're going to manage this project to try and keep the costs under the contingency so we actually get some money back? And if there are some savings, well, that'd be great. Rather than the usual situation where we budget something and then coincidentally, what we pay out is the budget.
Okay, I think we have the question there.
The answer is the Alliance is incentivised to deliver under the budget.
Great.
And penalised for delivering over.
Thank you.
Councillor Mike Lee.
Yes, thank you. I just want to, if I could refer you to page 9 on the agenda, which is a table of costs allocated between Crown and the council group and between construction and other lines.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can I ask you, in terms of those budget lines, event-related services at 7.3 million, that stays the same?
Correct.
No blowout there. So, commercial and base-related costs, 42.1 million, that stays the same?
Sorry, Megan's just reminded me, these were the budgets as of March. This is not a comparison from one period to the other. This looks at the total cost as budgeted in March and the split between Crown and Council.
29th of March.
It's not a comparison between...
It was a reminder for you of the decisions you made in March and the split between Crown and Council and the budget that it was at that point of 212 million all up.
I'm just trying to get some information here that it's not becoming not very clear. Here is the total budgeted cost at March, and
Correct.
now we're dealing with a significant increase, and I'm just trying to trace where that comes from.
Okay, so look, the only line on that table that changes is the top one, is the construction line. You'll see the split between Crown and Council for construction infrastructure. It equals 123. We had 29 to
Okay,
that.
just construction is blown out. All the rest is okay. Well, surprise, surprise. Look, let me ask another question if I could, and I won't be long about it. You mentioned decontamination is coming as a surprise, but it shouldn't have, given the years of experience this council and its predecessor has in that particular area. So I'm not going to question that. My question is, in terms of the dredging costs, which appear to be major part of the increase, I'm hearing that part of that cost is the disposal at the Navy dump site out past Cuvier Island. Is that correct?
Some of it is, and other is landfilling that material.
You realise that the harbour is being dredged every day of the week virtually by Ports of Auckland, and for some years now that those dredgings have been incorporated into their Ferguson terminal work as Mudcrete. Has it been explored with Ports of Auckland that they incorporate the dredgings there for mutual benefit?
The options of mudcreting, and it's more than just that location as well, is still on the table and being actively pursued. So that is, it's got some other benefits as well if we can achieve that, because it actually locks up contaminants and so forth. So mudcreting is an alternative, and that then is a savings, is active and alive.
So the cost may not be as high as being portrayed here then, is that the case?
Hopefully, but that's, again, this is where we're sitting at the moment, and if other savings come in, then those will be of benefit to Council and Crown.
Just given the original 100 million increase, do you not think that in the real world out there, in our construction sector as it is now, that the availability of all this money from the generous Auckland Council and the government may actually be fueling these expectations in the market? If somebody tried on 100 million, do you not think that it's because the council and its resources is part of the problem here, and its generosity?
Well, the way this works is that we have an independent cost estimator who challenges everything on the way through. Those challenges have been very strong, and so we have independent expert advice to challenge costs as the Alliance puts them up.
I know there's a problem, and you're very wise not to say there won't be any increases, because you know and I know there will be. Do you not think that overshooting, in terms of dredging, for instance, is only going to encourage a high price from dredging, rather than saying, no, we're not going to pay that much, think of another way? No, or we're going to... You're acknowledging that actually dredging costs could actually come down, but we're going to budget for a higher cost. Is that right?
We're budgeting for the costs as we know them now, and there could be opportunities, and there are opportunities that are being pursued, but nothing is established as to around how we can reduce those. So rather than do what's been done in the past, where we took an optimistic view, let's take a realistic view. This is what we know it will cost, and actively look for opportunities to reduce.
That's up to 60%.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newman, last question.
Oh,
sorry.
No, just talk.
Oh, you'd like to comment, John?
That's a brief comment at the appropriate
Okay, well, let's move into the comment section now.
Just a very brief question.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
You asked my question before, but I just want to know who was it amongst all the parties who proposed the Wynyard Edge Alliance? You know, was it the council? Was it government? I actually welcome the fact we have the alliance, and I see the benefits that might come with this rather than a traditional procurement approach. But I'd just like to understand whose initiative it was.
I look to point that or give it to either Crown or Council. This was a joint coming together of this is the only way, the best way of dealing with a project that was highly variable, not certain in terms of scope. We need to get things moving very quickly. So this was a joint Council Crown proposal. It was always there, and there was really little debate over that being the right contracting model.
So this kind of alliance would be quite common in projects of this kind, internationally?
Oh, and domestically as well. There are significant alliance in contracts. The Waterview Tunnels was an alliance in contract. Nectar, which is dealing with Kaikoura earthquake aftermath, that's an alliance, and of course CRL are looking at alliancing as well.
So for, you know, there are legitimate concerns that councillors have expressed about cost escalation, and the question that I was going to ask, and the Mayor asked before me, was what measure of comfort we can take that you're not going to be sitting around the table here in a month's time saying, oh, by the way, we discovered this. As I understand it, and I could be wrong, the Project Alliance Agreement going unconditional at this point will mean that you will not be sitting at the table with us if we agree to this today, except for totally extraordinary reasons. Could you just, for those who are not familiar with these kinds of alliance agreements, give us a very quick understanding of why going unconditional will give greater certainty to the council on its obligations?
Under this model, the incentives are very heavily there to drive price reduction. The way that if this target is beaten, then the benefits of that, the saved monies are shared between the parties, between the owners, Crown Council, and the alliance parties. If they go over and it costs more, then everyone suffers pain together, and that takes away the profit margin. That's where it first goes. So there is a great driver here to look at ways of optimising the project to achieve good financial outcomes.
So what was the first time such an alliance has been used in New Zealand's history? I mean, we know about Waterview, we know about CRL, we know, but I'd just like to understand how long these have been around in terms of efficiency of delivery.
Yeah, 15 years or more. Major NZTA uses alliancing extensively, and on the Project Alliance board we have one of the Crown's Crown has nominated a representative from NZTA to bring that experience to them. So NZTA would be the most experienced party in New Zealand and have been doing it for many years.
And was it because of the alliance we were able to see the consents coming through as quickly, or was that an unrelated? Because I must say I was really impressed that that came through when it did.
I think credit, all the parties contributed to the consents, but Panuku led the initiative, and for them to be able to lead that with the support of the regulatory team, the Alliance, Crown and Council, that's where they had the leadership role, and that's where primary credit should fall.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just so we've got the recommendations on the table, I'll move accordingly. Do I have a seconder for that?
Happy to second.
Councillor Cooper, I think I saw first. Right, we'll now come to the comment stage, and if we can keep our comments tight, that would be really appreciated. First speaker, Councillor Newman.
Oh, thank you. Actually, should Linda want to say? Thank you, Your Worship. Look, what I wanted to do is just foreshadow, and I'm grateful that you have incorporated this into the substantive amendment, and that was new 8 and new G.
Scroll down.
Scroll down.
Sorry, we'll bring it up so you can see it. There it is.
Yeah, and look, this really goes, I guess, to the point that Councillor Walker raised, and I accept his concern. And what I've tried to foreshadow here is trying to address the matter that I signalled in the workshop, that I would expect that there will need to be a rephasing of budget, and this is an acknowledgement that I think that needs to be ring-fenced to capital projects within the wider city centre, as opposed to going wider than that, because I think the focus here very much is on the capital works program for the delivery of the infrastructure to enable the 36th defence of the America's Cup. I support the America's Cup, and I want us to defend it, and I believe that the America's Cup has been a catalyst for transformation, generational transformation at the waterfront, and I think that is something that it's been a real game changer. That 1995 victory in San Diego and the subsequent development of the waterfront has been a game changer for Auckland. But if there is to be an exercise in reprioritisation that we have to undertake subsequent as part of the annual plan process, I wouldn't want to see that come at the detriment of projects outside of the wider city centre, Your Worship. So my support for this package of recommendations is contingent on the new G as has been set out, and I moved it as an amendment, but you've incorporated it, so thank you for that. But it is really to go directly to the point that Councillor Walker raised, because I do see that there is a potential opportunity cost that would be paid, and without this matter being clarified in a resolution, that would leave me uncomfortable. So I'm hoping that what I have put up there assuages some of the concerns that Councillor Walker raised, because I share those concerns.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments. I guess I'm feeling, rather uncomfortable with the situation today. Perhaps a little bit reassured by Councillor Newman's amendment and some of the comments by the Mayor. But if I look back to that 29th of March meeting with the total budgeted cost at that stage was 212 million, and the council shared just under half that. It's gone up by 30 million. But the reason I say that, because my parting shot on that particular meeting was, please don't come back to us for any more money, and I remember that quite distinctly. So I feel a little honour bound to follow up on that, because that comment, and I think it was probably a sentiment that was held by other councillors too, wasn't just the significant cost of the America's Cup, it's this other massive investment into the city centre and downtown that comes in various shapes and forms, as a prelude to that, and that's in the wider context of Auckland, where there is a bit of a feeling that there is a city-centric a bias, and that's reflected in budgets, and it doesn't sit well with people. And I think most councillors that are out in the suburbs that will realise that. So today we hear back 30 million, but to be honest, when I look at the key drivers that are outlined for us in terms of the dredging, Councillor Walker's really raised a valid point there. It's hard to understand how you could be so far out on that one. Floating pontoons, the price, I would have thought, that would be something would have a degree of certainty too. Wave break structures, more extensive, well, yeah, I could perhaps understand that. And the old one of time frame, now the one of time frame came up before in our original decision on the siting of the bases, and this just isn't this today. I go back to that decision that we made, again based on information that Wynyard Point had a number of risks, not least of which was the time frame and the contamination, the complex lease negotiations. Then lo and behold, old Minister Parker weighs in, and very quickly it's the preferred site. Yet we were getting told something quite different. So I guess, Mr. Beer, if I'm going to be honest about that, my concern goes to the accuracy of information that we've received. Initially with the choice of site, and also with the very important identification of the budget. And today we've heard from the officers, comments like not great information, no cost plan, moving feast, didn't know level of contamination, hard to make assumptions, uncertainty greater than what the finite budget directed. I don't remember too many of those qualifiers at the time when we were voting. I don't remember that degree of uncertainty. And I assume that uncertainty was there in a reasonable amount. So as much as there's been and credit to Barry in particular, a kind of more open assessment of costs going forward, my concern hasn't been allayed any here today, and I say it in view of that wider context, which is not reassuring. Accuracy of information, accuracy of costs, it's starting to become something of a recurring theme in this council in terms of projects, and that puts everyone in an invidious position, not least of which is elected members who have to go out and try and justify this to people in their wards.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, when this was brought to us, I struggled over the last week or so when it was brought to us, and when I end up struggling with issues from a regional perspective, I go to two places. One is what benefit, and Councillor Collins mentioned this at one of the first workshops, around what benefit will companies or the people in South Auckland will get from the America's Cup. So I will go back to that all the time, and what benefit will South Auckland companies and our community have. The other place I go to for at least for me to make a decision, Your Worship, is around the benefits. So, Your Worship, look, I'm going to go to the benefits first, and then I'm going to go around, and that's the benefits around what we will end up getting as a result of hosting with Emirates Team New Zealand, the event company, the America's Cup. And I went on and read a report from the tourism website that the government at the time commissioned. And the time frame was from 30th of June 2000 to the 30th of June 2003, after the 2003. And when I look into that, is actually quite pleasing from my perspective in regards to making a decision. Because one, we not only got global media exposure, we also had obviously visitors to Auckland, New Zealand. The estimated there was estimated that 450 million of the 529 million, the economic impact to Auckland in our economy. And for me, I'm looking at that and was pleased to see that. There was also, Your Worship, when we had a look at it, which sectors provided the greatest contribution. And interesting enough, the sectors here were International Challenge Syndicates, 171 million. Visiting super yachts and other yachts, 155 million, were the highest contributors to the expenditure. So then I go back and say, okay, well, who were the beneficiaries from this? And the marine industry, $143 million. It's on the tourism website. Accommodation and hospitality, and I know how many of our community in the south, but obviously across the region are in that field, 92 million. Retail entertainment, 132 million. Business and household services, 48 million, such as legal, accountancy, transport, 47.5. So, you know, that's the benefit from a regional perspective. I then wanted to have a look and see what benefits that South Auckland, and even, funny enough, East Auckland would got. So to Kevin, thank you. Thank you for the list that you sent to me after the 29th of March, and I received that list on the 3rd of April. And I contacted some of the businesses in the south, and I've got a list of 50 that for South Auckland and East Auckland, and I contacted some of them. And Your Worship, I know my time's running out, but I just want to very briefly mention comments that I got from people in 3 of these companies. Now, some of them are in Pakuranga. I know it's not really our ward, but it's Pakuranga. One was in Onehunga, Jim Jackson from Jackson Electrical. And I just wanted to quote these 3 people that I got. So from Mr. Jackson, and I'm not going to read the whole letter he sent me, and I only spoke to them. But Jackson Industries, they employ 80 people, and as a result of 2000, they've been working with Emirates Team New Zealand since 2000, and most of the people that work at Jackson Electrical from South Auckland. So really the things, this is his quote, really things we have outlined here, a lot of which has been driven by our involvement with Emirates Team New Zealand over the last 18 years. We have supported them over the years, but has also brought long-term benefits to Jackson and its staff, and most of them, as we said, from New Zealand. I even contacted the National Sales Manager for Ulrich Aluminium, who's another company, very briefly. He in his fabricators, in their section, He's got 7 people. He doesn't know whether he would have the 7 there if it wasn't for the America's Cup 2021, because he's going to have 4 people. Most of them are going to South Auckland. This is in Manuko. He's got 4 people working full-time in the next 3 years, just basically on that. And Chair, I've just only got 30 seconds, and if yeah, thank you. 30 seconds, and this is from the CEO of Rayglass. And as a result of the America's Cup, 200 suppliers he has, subcontracts that his company uses as a result of the America's Cup. And he started an apprenticeship. And he started that in 2016 as a result of the America's Cup. And 75 people have made use of the apprenticeship, people again within South Auckland. So, Your Worship, I'm going to close and just want to say thank you to Councillor Collins for the 30 seconds. And I will be supporting the recommendation based on what I've just said. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. Basically, a no deal can go to a deal on the explicit condition that the money comes from within existing CBD projects and outer suburb projects are not jeopardised, or their money used to prop up this project.
Thank you. Short and to the point. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I recall in June 2017, Mr. Mayor, your first response to the news of the projected costs likely for Auckland with the America's Cup, and a lot of people sympathised with you on that point, and so did I, and that is the bulk of the money should come from the private sector. But we know, and you know, now that this is not how the game is played, especially when it comes to America's Cup. The public are always asked to stump up, and despite assertions that the America's Cup is the sport of the common man or the common people, whatever, it is the sport of billionaires, for billionaires. It's just the ordinary people have to pay for it. Now, this blowout shouldn't come as a surprise in a way. It's very interesting and telling that the only increase relates to construction. And I believe it's systemic of the whole construction sector in Auckland and the challenges we have in public sector procurement in such an atmosphere. We are blessed, I guess, by living in a time, unlike a generation ago, of virtually no currency inflation. But we have an overheated construction market. We have a monopoly in construction material, and in my view, we have widespread gaming within the market. And in this case, the public are going to have to pay, or being asked to pay, originally 100 million extra, but still 24%, still a major increment. I guess, Mr. Mayor, we've heard about some of the benefits of the America's Cup, but none of the disbenefits. We know about the costs, but none of the disbenefits. And I guess somebody has to remember the ratepayers here. We made an agreement earlier this year, a very generous agreement, about how much, on expert advice, we thought of how much it would cost, and now we have this increment, major increment, and it won't be the end. So I'll tell you what, I'm getting off the bus here. We made a point earlier this year that don't come back and ask for more, and so it looks like that advice wasn't really taken to heart, wasn't taken as meant as being serious. Well, from me it was serious, and therefore I'm not going to support another cent extra for the America's Cup. I'll leave it at that. there'll be more increases to come, and some of you may join me at that stage, but I'm ending my support of this right now. We made a deal. It's up to the government and the Alliance and all those other people to make this thing work. The ratepayers of Auckland should not have to pay more for this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Sure. I'll just make a few points. I guess the first one goes to my concern about cuts and where the cuts are going to be made, and I'm much more encouraged that they'll be made within the inner city area, because that is the area that will most benefit from this over time, I would suggest. Having said that, I think the larger context that is looming will be the cost blowouts that are likely around the CRL and how we're going to deal with that. And all of these blowouts for me are in that bigger context, because I don't know how we're going to cope with that, and hopefully the officers have got some plan Bs there and Cs and Ds. The other concern that I've got generally is that there's a pattern with these projects time and time again. Something's put to us, it's put to us on the basis of a cost. The council says yes, the project advanced. Lo and behold, the cost racks up. And I'd remind councillors that this is happening with all sorts of projects that are before us now. And when councillors like me raise issues around these things and we say we don't believe these costs, others around the table look at you and they think, gee, where's he coming from or she coming from? But 9 times out of 10, and I'd suggest 10 times out of 10, we're right. That is the pattern. So it's of huge concern. I'm not suggesting that it's gaming, as some other councillors would say, but it's certainly rather prevalent. And it means that we have to have very close scrutiny over projects, and they may be being put up by various CCOs of recent days to get stuff over the line, and some of those costs, escalations will go to tens and tens and tens of millions. And my concern, and this goes to other projects, is often there's information effectively being withheld from us as councillors. And that's not good. So we actually don't know in advance until it's too close to do anything about it. And that goes to this particular agenda item, which I think is incredibly thin, and that appears to be a pattern as well. Give councillors, give the general public of Auckland really thin advice, especially as it goes to oversight over costs. No consideration of where any anticipated revenue is coming from. And my concern around that is that there are lots of companies in Auckland that know a lot about dredging and pontoons and all kinds of stuff. You know, Auckland is a seafaring location. And if you've got more information, if we've got more information, if people out there have got more information, you have more scrutiny. Team New Zealand knows that if it wants to make the boat go faster, you have a team approach and you have lots of people with lots of oversight coming up with neat ideas to make that happen. But I don't see that. Hats off to Team New Zealand. They've got their act together, and I'm sure that they'll do well. And I'd just like to commend Minister Parker, because frankly, if it wasn't due to him and the government, we would have massive cost overruns over this project as it goes to location. So thank goodness we had some oversight on their part. So I think there are some lessons to learn from this project, Mr. Mayor, and I just hope that we learn those lessons and apply them to some other projects that may be near and dear to some CCOs, but frankly may not stack up.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors are quite right today to really interrogate this, because there is a measure of disappointment. We can't mask it, that you've come back to us with more money. I accept that with the Project Alliance agreement, we are obliged to actually contribute. I must say that I'm bitterly disappointed that we are yet to see the government minister up here on this. And that's why I asked the question about who proposed it, because if it was on the basis of 50-50 as part of the Project Alliance, I would have seen it as a mark of respect that the government minister himself would have actually fronted up to us today. However, that hasn't been the case. So the discussion that I had with Councillor Newman is really, we want to see the America's Cup succeed, but the cost should fall in the inner city area if there is to be some sort of rephasing of budgets required. So I think, and I commend the Mayor for incorporating that into the general recommendations that are being put to you. But I do want to put you on alert in confirming the delegation to the CEO that where we've got G, we've got the Project Alliance Agreement, and we've really analysed that to death today, but do not come back to us on the host venue agreement, the owner's agreement, or any other agreement anticipated in or required to give effect to the host city appointment agreement. So let me just be really clear to you today, not through any other committee or arm of council or CCO do I expect any of those to have any dollar sums being assigned to them, because that would be bitterly disappointing. And it perhaps is a question I should have asked directly of you, but I think, shame we don't have Hansard, as we've said from time to time. I would like that recorded by officers in bold print. But in supporting this today, I want to speak, you know, we've had the benefits and disbenefits well articulated by Councillor Filipaina, but Councillor Bartley quite properly says, you know, what's in it for the people of South Auckland, and isn't this just about a rich man's sport? Well, I want to say that 23 years ago, when we first started discussing this in 1995, tourism wasn't New Zealand's largest industry. The biggest issue that we had to contend with was unemployment. And since 1995, we have seen, as Councillor Filipaina has outlined, we have seen growth in apprenticeships associated with the marine industry. We have seen opportunity, and frankly, we would not have had the opening up of the waterfront. So yes, it might be a rich man's sport. Yes, it might be about the contest of egos amongst some super squillion billionaires. But along with that has come some massive benefits for the average Aucklander, the average New Zealander, and it's given a real sense of hope and possibility. And I put it to you that tourism probably wouldn't be as far advanced in New Zealand today if it weren't for those catalysts like the America's Cup. So while I feel a bitter measure of disappointment that our partners in this, the government, haven't fronted up to meet with us today, I am willing to support that additional expenditure on the basis that if there is to be any cost rephasing, that will actually come from the city centre budget. It's not fair to those of you who are living outside of the city centre that those costs should fall on other budgets. So I think that this is probably, while it's uncomfortable, this is probably the most fair and equitable way of moving forward today. But on a positive note, I'm really excited about the America's Cup. I really think that what is being proposed on the inshore, having gone and paid to go and see San Francisco and whether or not that was a success, it was a dismal failure for me as a consumer, as a tourist, because you couldn't get close to it. It didn't excite and engage the Americans. You know, we've got a very different proposition here, and I think that Kevin and his team have really responded to it well, whether it's the timing of the races, whether it's the proximity to the race, all of these things on accessibility, making sure it's free so that anybody who wants to come into town and really enjoy this event can do so. So I say it's a bloody great shame that we're having to pay a bit more money, but I think we are going to have a really good event, and it's time now to get in behind this. But be on notice, Mr. CEO, do not come near us with host venue agreements. Do not come near us with owners' agreements or any other agreements, because you've hit the limit in terms of tolerance from the ratepayer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, this wasn't in my notes, but I just want to say I am a bit disappointed that some of us feel the need to slam our staff and commend Team New Zealand as having their act together, when frankly, without council and the senior staff time over all this time, and also a proposed after today, 46.7 million contribution of our ratepayers, this event just would not happen. So I think, you know, there's credit all around for everybody that's contributing. So guys, I want to say first is that I'm actually satisfied that our best efforts at the budgets in March were there given the time constraints. Remember, we had to get this ready to have consents. We had to cast back and cast forward our time frame to get the consents in time to actually have this happen and do the construction that needed to happen. We were we were literally under the pump to get that through. And I think probably for us, maybe we should have set a limit that was up to. And it is pleasing to see that, as Councillor Hills said earlier, we had a much bigger budget earlier. We went back and we've got this habit of wanting to screw everything down and pressure to go, it's got to be cheaper, it's got to be cheaper, when we actually know, and I've had experience in my own life, just like any other household when you do a construction, 18 months from start to finish, a 40% cost increase. But we were extremely happy with the outcome. We'd already sunk huge costs, like we've already sunk 31 million. We couldn't go back, we had to go forward, but we got a great result at the end. And 12 years down the line, we used quality materials, we did it right, and it was worth it. So the other thing I want to say, construction, dredging. Now we talk about dredging is extremely expensive, and at the moment Ports of Auckland have nearly finished their reclamation in Ferguson Wharf, and Aucklanders don't want any more reclamation, so at the moment they have an application to the EPA for a 35-year consent to dispose of their dredging beyond Cuvier Island, which is a 310-kilometre round trip from Auckland. That is why it is so expensive, because we cannot dump in the Waitemata Harbour anymore. So those are the kinds of costs that are huge. And I know that because up at West Park Marina, or as it's Hobsonville Marina, the costs for dredging up there is what keeps your costs high for berths, etc. So, we've got to understand that you just say dredging, but there's a huge amount involved, and none of us want that stuff dumped in our own harbour because we'd have an uproar. And actually the Ports of Auckland had a stakeholder group talk about that and work through it before their application. So I think we've got to remember that. I guess for me, then I'll go to the benefits. We're removing the silos, we're removing the car parks, and those for me are enabling works, albeit earlier than we were going to do, for planned development on Wynyard Point. So that's the legacy stuff that I'm talking about. Notwithstanding all the excitement and the tourism and etc., the local jobs. We've already got a sunk cost, so that means that we can go ahead with that development. One of the other advantages is that in developing our waterfront, as we had with the last time we hosted, we have a huge injection of government money to help develop our waterfront, which otherwise we just wouldn't have. We'd have to be doing that on our own, so I see a big advantage in that. We might have to bring it a bit forward, but we get somebody else putting money in and it gets left behind. And I think jobs, I'm looking at just a quick off the top of the head from Team New Zealand, 20 businesses, West Auckland, Northwest Kumeu, Hobsonville, 20 local businesses. Those people aren't millionaires that live in Henderson and Avondale, Kumeu and Hobsonville. Those are ordinary folks working in those industries that are going to serve Team New Zealand. And I'm not even talking about Orams Precinct, 100 different subcontracting companies. So this is enormous, and all those jobs won't end, because we know that once we get on the world stage, like Southern Spas, they're doing massive exports now because they are world renowned for their yachting expertise. So for me, it's really important, that we do this now. It is a struggle having to spend more, but if we don't do it, we don't have a cup. And there's too much sunk costs as far as I'm concerned. I'm not prepared to waste 31.2 million in all those designs and everything else we've done. So I support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. No, just quickly, and I do worry how much we diss our staff when they're the ones doing the work. And the Wynyard Edge Alliance is our staff, the Crown staff, and all the contractors that have come on board. So this is why, although I'm disappointed that it's gone up, I have confidence in the figures because you're actually all working together and working your butts off actually to try and get this done as fast as possible. I know the consenting process has been a huge job. And I've gone down and talked to the Wynyard Edge Alliance and met with people and understand, how intense this has been to try and get through the process so far. So, big thanks to everyone, even though this is a frustrating situation. It's frustrating for me because we brought the cost down or tried to squeeze it down, and maybe it was because of the fast pace of it all, but we did all unanimously support options to be investigated at the time that were far greater than this. All of them were greater than this, I think, apart from one. I mean, at the time I put up an amendment to remove the Halsey extension and everyone voted against me at the time. Lucky that didn't happen. But that was the most expensive version, and we still investigated that. So I'm just disappointed that we have to have this discussion now, and in future, if there's a way to say there's a top rate, and maybe that means that people aim for that figure instead of work backwards, then I don't know. But it gives people a false sense of security over figures. The other thing, it is the jobs and what it's going to create for our city, and we supported it months ago. So I think the argument kind of is, if we don't support this now, we're pulling the event, which is just an impossible situation. And San Francisco, I think some of the economic figures come out of there. It was an $800 million effect to their GDP and 4,000 jobs, and that was the figures come out. So we know and hope that it's bigger than that, but I've been down to Orams, I've been asking about apprenticeships because it's crucial that everyone, and I think we're clearer and clearer that it needs to be for our young people, for people in our communities that are getting these roles, getting these jobs. And these are jobs that are not just the general, go to university, get a degree and go on to, there's a whole raft of jobs and apprenticeships that can come out of this, and they can last forever. I know people who came through Southern Spas and have gone off to have huge careers overseas and different things who weren't maybe the best at the academic side of life. And, so I think that it's important that we acknowledge what it's going to be for the city and New Zealand. Even though this is a frustration, it looks like an extra cost, it's mostly going to be moved around of the city centre projects, which we're getting help from the government, which if this wasn't happening, most of these projects were planned in the near future anyway, and we would have been funding them all ourselves. So I just want to crack on. I want to make sure in the future that we have maybe a better estimate of cost, especially when we estimated higher and supported those figures higher before, and then we came back and it's a bit of a tennis match back and forth. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thank you very much, sir. I was glad Councillor Filipaina reminded the table or this meeting of the benefits that were coming out south, because when I listened to Tina speak to us this morning, she said she doesn't have the economic figures at a level of detail to quantify this in a meaningful way. So I guess my non-confidence around that was answered by Councillor Filipaina. People will remember how I voted, not on the 29th, but prior to that. And so I've come today and I really did want to listen. I'm glad that Councillor Newman's amendment has been incorporated. But I started to think of where Councillor Bartley was going with some of her questions. I've got very similar entries on my Facebook page. Mind you, I've only got 10 followers. And, but so nowhere near as popular as you, Councillor Bartley.
11 now.
Yeah. But I started to think about what the other impact might be for the young people in South Auckland. And granted, the recent media, I guess schools like King's College and St Kitts might want to jig some of their money they're offering our Pacific kids rugby scholarships and giving them some sailing scholarships instead. And I don't want to go down the line of our bad memories when we remember how well we were doing in the San Francisco Regatta when we were ahead 8-1 and then we lost, unfortunately, 9-8. But there was a report in 2013 that was produced by the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, and there's been some talk about what happened over there. And they talk about the general excitement there was prior to the regatta or prior to the America's Cup defence going on there in San Francisco. And in the early days, they estimated it would return, economic impact would be at least $1.4 billion. The Bay Area Council Economic Institute concluded that in the end, the actual economic impact to us was less than 50% of those projected figures. So I wonder if we're getting a little bit excited about what the reality is, and often when we start building these kinds of, building up for these kinds of events, we get lost a little bit in the hype. I want to quote, and I make an apology now. This is a quote from economist Shamubul Yaqub, and he uses a word that I wouldn't use in church. And he says, the economic benefits of a cup regatta would be based on overhyped studies that are proven to be absolute bullshit after the fact. No different to the report that was produced in 2013 by the Bay Area Council Economic Institute that says we didn't even achieve 50% of the projected economic benefit. Public Enemy, their rappers, don't believe the hype. And I wonder if we are falling for that very hype, the economic hype that we're being led to believe. I'll be voting against this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Clow.
I would challenge any councillor who's done house renovations to say they did it within budget. These things just happen, you know. You often go to do things that they end up costing more once you dig around underneath and find out what's... So I'm going to vote for this. I was going to anyway, and I was thinking of foreshadowing, previously doing an amendment like Councillor Newman, because I would like to think that that is comforting for Councillor Bartley to know that none of the ollies in the south or the west are going to be affected by this. This is merely a rejigging of the city centre budget, and the staff will have to go back and reprioritise. So I think that protects everything in the outer wards, so to speak. So there's not going to be any impact there. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to be supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I had the privilege this morning of going with Mayor Phil to unveil the breakthrough of the tunnels, the trenching tunnels for the CRL. And that's a big, complex project. But while we were waiting for our safety briefing, we were up in the CRL offices looking down on the Viaduct Basin and over to the Wynyard Basin. And I said to the Mayor and to the Chair of CRLL, we'll recall that basin before it was developed. And it was not a pretty place or a nice place for people to go to. And there's been lots of discussion today about the finances and extra costs that have come in. And that is what it is. It's not what we would like, but that is the reality of the commercial world we live in, where there's $80 billion worth of projects being built in the city at this very present time. And I'd like to commend Councillor Ow's words. The creation of employment and economic growth is where the industries are, and that's the airport precincts, East Tamaki and the south. And there's real advantages in those industries, whether it's making aluminium spars, whether it's making the stainless steel wires or the composite plastics. There's been some manic laughter about the wealth tied in around the America's Cup. I've met a few of the sailors over the years, and a lot of them just average Joe Blows and Janes. They're just average folk who love the water and live for that. And like a lot of sports, there is wealth attached to it. And we see that in rugby league, we see that in cricket, we see that in tennis. Sailing is just another sport. But to me, the big thing about this investment, this city's investment, is the legacy. The legacy of the Viaduct Basin for the city, for all Aucklanders and New Zealanders, as a tourist mecca. And look what's happening to the Wynyard Quarter now. Compare it now and envisage what it could be as compared to how it was in the early and late 1980s. Chalk and cheese. And so I guess our challenge is to have the courage and the wisdom to look forward and say, we want to leave that legacy. And yes, it's going to cost considerable sums of money. But just as with the CRL, it is always going to be cheaper yesterday and dearer tomorrow. But the real wealth is looking back on a job that's well done. And I'd like to thank our team, the Alliance members and the Crown for all the work that's been put in, and Emirates Team New Zealand. Because as that team, we'll be able to develop and deliver something really special for the city, for the country and for the world to enjoy. And whether the returns are hyped up or not, you can do the financial data at any spot in time. The legacy is in the history of the event, post the event, and what it leaves for us all. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cashmore. Josephine Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I'm not going to go to the America's Cup. I don't watch it on TV. I don't know anything about America's Cup or the boat race or anything like that, and I have no interest in it to be a spectator either. But it's not about me. It's about the Auckland, and I definitely know that there will be jobs that come out of it, because I've seen my friends who I grew up with in South Auckland get jobs out of previous major events that's been here. But I think anything that we invest in as Auckland Council needs to be relevant, needs to be meaningful to Māori, Pasifika, ethnic, low-income communities, because Auckland isn't just rich yachties. So I want to make that statement, you know, make sure that that statement has been heard by everybody in America's Cup, Team Emirates or whatever they're called. I do see that we are kind of screwed here. We've already invested 31 million on behalf of our Auckland ratepayers, and I don't want to see that wasted. So I do understand, you know, we've made a commitment to this America's Cup, and we need to see it through. So I do see the infrastructure that we get out of this long term, but I also see and get the feeling from people in my community that this is enough. You know, we've already committed money to it. I don't want to see any more investment go on this, because I've got a marae that was last upgraded in the 80s. I've got a grandstand at Waikaraka Park that we can't use because we've closed it down. And we've got buildings in our areas that we can't use because of black mould or whatever, and they're just run down. So I take comfort in Councillor Newman's resolution or recommendation up there, because I do think we need to look at our community assets as well. But I'm not off the bus yet, like Councillor Lee, but I'm getting there. So, you know, I'm not going to go against this. I'm going to support it because of the jobs that will come out of this and the the benefits to our economy. But, you know, it also needs to be opened up to everybody to benefit from. So I do appreciate Councillor Filipaina's comments earlier about the jobs and the businesses that will benefit. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I actually really enjoy watching the America's Cup, and I have always enjoyed it. But one of my concerns is that I think most of the challenges around the world there've been quite a few challenges, and at the moment the deadline was the 30th of November, and apparently there's 3 confirmed challenges, and there's 6 conditional challenges. And I'm just reading an article on I think it was the 4th of December. A respected yachting commentator claims teams' preparations for the next America's Cup could be set back by 3 months with technical difficulties. The type of yachts that we're now actually having that are being raced in the America's Cup, and it's something, it's wonderful that New Zealand's actually had a lot of the technology and everything, but it sounds like they're having a lot of problems with the foils at the moment, and I'm just concerned that in our waters, and maybe we're spending all this money. I'm just really, really concerned that some of the challengers may not even be able to take the challenge if we haven't got confirmation that the yachts are going to be able to be raced in our waters. It's just my concern. I mean, I do love the yachting. I love watching it, and I love watching New Zealand win. But it's a lot of money, and I'm taking up what Councillor Watson was saying, that we did say that when we voted in March, we did say that we wouldn't be, we didn't want any more money spent on it. So this is really hard for me at the moment, but unless I actually have confirmation that the yachts are actually going to be able to be used, maybe somebody from the, if we could have somebody come and answer.
Yeah. Oh, no, look, that's a fair point. With the indulgence of other councillors, perhaps Councillor Stewart, if I can ask Kevin, you're probably the best person here. It has been raised in the media, so it's important. I've had an answer, but I think you should all share in the answer that I've had.
Sorry, I think what you're talking about the foils?
The foils.
The foils, yes. So the foils are a one design engineering part which are going to be manufactured in Italy. There was some initial test pieces that have been done that didn't come up to specification, to the satisfaction of all the competitors. So they've been re-engineered, rebuilt. That won't be an issue. There'll be no delay. There'll be no delay to the boats launching next year and racing in Europe, and certainly it won't have any effect on the America's Cup or the Challenger Series, that's for sure. And in the end, it's up to every individual team to make sure that they are structurally sound and capable of competing in the races. So I don't see it as an issue at all.
Thank you. I'm sure Councillor Stewart, you'll be pleased with that reassurance, straight from the horse's mouth, if that's a polite term to use about Kevin. Thank you for that, Kevin. You fine, Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Young.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to support this because for our economic and Auckland and New Zealand, but I do concern we already spent $31 million. However, from my personal view, it's not only an American Cup, it's our New Zealand Cup, also Auckland Cup. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and for being so brief. And Councillor Casey, I think we're running out of councillors, so we're just about to terminate the debate.
I'll be very brief. I just want to thank Councillor Bartlett and Councillor Collins for reminding us all, as I will be doing, about all those citizens that live in Auckland that may not come to the Cup, that it may bypass them. And I just want to point out that I'm sitting here thinking, should I move an amendment? And here's what, I'm not going to, but it's to the staff. I'd like to move the amendment that says up to an additional 14.5 million, because in the Mayor's annual budget, we're giving $5 million for the rebuild of the Auckland City Mission. What they could do with 19.5 million. And so that's what I'm saying to you. Every penny you save can be spent somewhere else in the city to other citizens. So it's not giving you the 14.5 and come back for more. Come back with some money for us to do other things with. So just bear in mind that every cent is ratepayers' money that could be better spent elsewhere. Or as well spent elsewhere. No, better spent elsewhere.
Thank you,
We'll be supporting the recommendations, but do expect you to come back and never asking for more. Just resign, Dean.
Thank you very much, Councillor. If I can just wind up the debate and say, when I first heard the news that there had been a significant increase in costings by 100 million, I wasn't unhappy. I hit the roof. And I want to acknowledge the fact that Auckland Council officers, central government officers and Team New Zealand worked together on instruction from Minister Parker and myself to pull that back, and pulling it back by 70 million was a significant achievement, and that was an achievement for all three groups involved in that partnership, and the Wynyard Alliance Group. I've got to say, I'm never surprised when costs go up. In the last week, we've seen 2 companies go under. RCR Tomlinson, which has an important role to play in the CRL. Hopefully the Auckland branch will not be affected by that. And Corbell Construction, because they got their costings wrong and they lost money and they were put into administration. We saw that happen to Ebert. We saw Fletcher's, one of the biggest firms in New Zealand, lose $1 billion across the road on the International Convention Centre in the Justice Precinct. So if I thought it was just a disease that afflicted council, I'd be really unhappy. But it's only a small consolation that this seems to be a real problem right across our construction industry. And I don't think actually there's a single person around this table that expressed surprise that the cost came out higher. That does not let you guys off the hook. You know, we expect even better from you, and you've heard a very clear message from around the table that we're not about to throw a lot of money at it. I want to address a couple of concerns. One, the rich person sport. I was brought up in a Catholic working class home. So I have this ethic. When I see a super yacht and I know that it's not just worth $30 million, but it costs $2 million a year to keep it afloat and the owner's only on it for a week a year, there's something inside me that gets offended. But actually what isn't offended is that when they spend their money in New Zealand and they provide jobs from working New Zealanders. I like that. I welcome any rich person to come and spend their money in New Zealand because it provides jobs and incomes and adds to our economy. And that's what it's about. And I listened very carefully to Councillor Bartley, and I know her concerns and I appreciate her concerns. I also heard that Southern Spars is based in Onehunga, and that the jobs were coming in Onehunga, Penrose and Mount Wellington. And for those of you around the table that have expressed the concern that was epitomised in the G resolution that I'm very happy to incorporate, actually the jobs and the services, as Councillor Filipaina pointed out, are coming from right around the city. The jobs are not just created for people in the city centre, they're created for all Aucklanders. And when I look at that up to 8,400 jobs, the prediction is that 7,800 of them will be in Auckland. When I see the figures from MB, 600 million to $1 billion, I know that most of that money is going to be spent in Auckland. And I listened, Councillor Collins, to what you said about San Francisco, but I also pulled out the reports that we had from 1999 and 2003, and those figures of what the benefit to the New Zealand economy is consistent to what the projections are. So I hope that's some reassurance to you. I think that's important to figure out. So why are we doing this? This is a serious amount of ratepayer and taxpayer money. By the way, Councillor Walker, you raised with me the other day, why is the government meeting a fair share of it? My calculation is they're meeting 136, we're meeting 109. So they're paying about a third more than us.
I'd like them to pay a lot more.
Yeah, I would too, but I'm realistic in what I can expect from my fellow New Zealanders who understand that when the infrastructure is built using taxpayers' money, it stays in Auckland. It's interesting that. We've got Queen's Wharf for the Rugby World Cup. It didn't move out of Auckland after the Rugby World Cup. It's there for us to use, and God bless the government that paid for half of that cost. But I look at the overall thing and say, are we getting value for money? Because like Councillor Casey, I think about, what the Auckland City Mission is doing. I think about the time of the year. I think about where we could be spending this money. And I've got to justify it to myself, and we all have to justify it to our ratepayers. But the jobs that are created, the boost to the economy, the fact that we are showcasing our city to the world, and we heard from Tina Simmons about some of the international broadcasting channels from the States, from Europe, from China and Asia, it's a chance for us to showcase the beauty of our environment, boosting our biggest single industry in Auckland, tourism. It's a chance for us to showcase that we've got cutting-edge technology thanks to what our folk in the yachting industry are doing and Team New Zealand. We are world-beating, and it's a chance to showcase the skills that we have as New Zealanders, as sportsmen and women, that we can beat anybody, no matter how big they are in the world. When I watched Team New Zealand thrash Oracle at the last Cup, I felt good as a New Zealander. When I saw New Zealand, all 4.6 million of us, beat the United States with its 350 million, I felt good as a New Zealander. You know, yeah, I'm used to winning at rugby, but to take on some of those other sports and be the best in the world, that's something that you can't put a price on. And, you know, when I watched the America's Cup parade, and I was there with my kids when they were little in '95, and I was there again when the Cup came home last time, I just saw a cross-section of Aucklanders, all race, colour, creed, socio-economic background, and they were proud of what we were doing as New Zealanders. When I see Peter Burling out there talking down the loudmouth Aussie that was trying to run us down in Bermuda, I feel proud. There's another guy like Ed Hillary, modest, humble, but a world beater. And that's worth something to us, and we can't ignore it. I think of the vibrancy and the excitement that we are going to see down there. We are going to run the best ever America's Cup because we've got the base in the heart of the city, not in some outflung area like San Francisco or Bermuda, but right in the heart of the city. And the races that we'll be able to stand on Bastion Point or stand on North Head, and we can watch the races from the shore. That's going to bring a level of excitement to this city in 2021 that helps make us world class. And when I watched that last race of the last America's Cup down at the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron, I was looking at the kids in the front 3 rows, looking up and being inspired by what we could do as a nation, and that we could be the best, and we are the city of sails. We are the home for the America's Cup, the New Zealand Cup, as Peter Montgomery called it. And then I think of the marine sports that will be able to use the legacy of what we create there in the infrastructure. And I think of the regeneration that we got out of the last 2 America's Cups and the Viaduct Basin, and what we're now seeing on Wynyard Point. Those appalling hazardous substance tanks being ripped down. I went down with a couple of colleagues just to celebrate seeing that come down, and I could see that that is returning a real benefit. So I'm with Councillor Fletcher about the excitement that this can create, and I'm with the Deputy Mayor on what we can do to regenerate our city and help bring forward some of these schemes, create the infrastructure, create a city that we can be proud of. So I certainly commend these recommendations to councillors, and I thank all councillors for their very positive input to the debate that we have had this afternoon. Almost every councillor wanting to participate, wanting to speak, and doing so in, I think, a very constructive spirit. So the resolution has been moved by myself, now seconded by Councillor Fletcher, I think. Councillor Cooper has graciously given way on that. I'll put the...
Mr. Mayor, can I just, in terms of the amended or the addendum in red, could I just ask a question about that, please? Its meaning, because we've heard that there are going to be a lot of benefits, especially in terms of employment in East Tamaki.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I'm going to have to rule... Councillor, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to rule you out of order. I have put the motion, and the time for debate and questions are over. And everybody's had a fair go at it. So let me, once again, put the motion. Those in favour of recommendations A to H, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No. Please record my vote.
Okay, I declare it carried, and are there councillors that wish to have their votes recorded against the motion? Councillor Lee. Any other councillor? Councillor Collins.
And Watson.
And Councillor Watson.
And
Okay.
Councillor Walker.
And Walker. So I declare that passed by... Oh, actually, no, I can't. We didn't have a formal division. It is passed with 4 dissenting voices. Thank you very much, councillors. I think the debate has been a long one, but it's been very worthwhile. And let's have a 5-minute break before we move on to workshops. I think...